Chapter 10:15. The five of them sensed something and looked up at the sky. They saw Dean in midair. 80,000 life, energy. The middle-aged man wearing a mask glanced at the data on his wristwatch, and his expression changed slightly. He said to the people around him, "The opponent's perception is very strong. He must have hidden his strength. Get ready to fight." 80,000? The other four frowned. Such combat power was not inferior to them. Whoosh! Dean flew over and landed in front of them. He didn't deliberately disguise himself. He had estimated the strength of the five people through the sun beast's heat sensitivity. All of them were inner desolate level. Even if the other side was hiding their strength, it wouldn't be much different. The five of them sneered as they saw Dean appear in front of them. They knew that Dean had underestimated them. They were sent to the Devil's Pit to perform the task because they had a strong perception ability and a very profound concealment ability. They looked at each other. Camo looked at Dean and asked in a cold voice, "Who are you?" Dean wasn't in a hurry to attack. His eyes swept over the instruments in the hands of the two behind him. He smiled. "Are you from a nearby giant wall?" Cassim was also looking at Dean. He frowned as he saw the exquisite armor on Dean's body. He felt that things had deviated from his expectations. He asked, "Are you someone from a giant wall? It seems that you are the residents of the giant wall." Dean said to himself. His face showed a smile. "Can you show me the way?" Karma's face turned gloomy as he saw that Dean ignored his words. He inadvertently put his hand behind his back and made a gesture to his companion. "Are you an Abyss Walker? You too?" Dean looked at him in surprise. The other party had guessed his strength, but still dared to show such a look. Most of them were masters of the same level. He thought that his ability to hide his life fluctuations was already very strong. He didn't expect to meet someone stronger than him. The four people behind Casamo's face changed as they noticed the wording of Dean's words. They quietly moved back. Their movements were very subtle as they pulled away from Casamo. Dean noticed their movements but didn't care. He had the confidence to deal with even if there were 5 Abyss Walkers. Moreover, his intuition told him that it was impossible for there to be 5 Abyss Walkers. He hadn't met any giant wall that could cultivate so many abysses. "Are you the master of the wall?" Casimo stared at Dean. Dean smiled. "I used to be, but I'm not interested in being the master of the wall. You don't have to be nervous. I just want to find a place to rest. I'm not interested in ruling your giant wall. I hope you can lead the way." Casamo was angry as he heard Dean's tone. He wanted to laugh, but he held back. "The giant wall doesn't welcome outsiders. I advise you to leave. Don't cause unnecessary fights." Dean frowned and sighed. "So you don't intend to lead the way?" Casimo pulled out the demon-hunting dagger from his back, and it quickly melted into his body. His entire body demonized, and in the blink of an eye, he had turned into a giant lizard. However, unlike ordinary lizards, his body was not made of tough skin, but of scales. His arms had turned into sharp claws, and the nails were sharp and curved. Once he grabbed an enemy, he could easily tear off a piece of skin. In addition, the scales on his body were brightly colored, as if they were highly toxic. Under the sunlight, they gave off a mystical glow. His amber eyes stared at Dean. His body exuded a murderous aura. Sure enough, it's the Abyss. Dean felt the exuberant heat in his body. Sure enough, it's the Abyss. Dean felt the exuberant heat in his body. He glanced at the 4 people behind him who had moved far away, as if they were afraid of being affected by the battle. The other side obviously wasn't blindly arrogant and let one person fight. They knew that they couldn't intervene in the battle of the Abyss level. It seemed that the other side only had one Abyss, and it was a lower Abyss. Dean didn't try to persuade Casimo again. His body was covered in flames, and a special red bone appeared on his forehead. Casimo saw that Dean was also using the demon's body. He was about to launch a surprise attack when his companion behind him exclaimed. Casimo's heart skipped a beat. He instinctively glanced at the companion behind him. He saw the youth holding his watch. The youth trembled as he said, 940,000 life energy. 1 million. The 3 people next to him heard the youth's words. They were dumbfounded when they saw the data displayed on the watch. Huh? Dean also heard their conversation and saw their shocked look. He was puzzled, but he didn't stop. His forehead flashed, and a beam of light suddenly shot out. Cassamo was confused by his companion's words. He even had the urge to take back the watch. Millions of life, energy? How was it possible? Just as his thoughts were diverted, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. The scales on his body stood up, and his heart thumped wildly. He felt as if his heart had been pierced by a cold arrow. His body was stimulated by this premonition of danger, and he broke out in a cold sweat. A ray of white light passed through his pupils before he could react. The next moment, all his thoughts stopped. The only thing he could think of was that it was very hot. Plop. Cashamo fell to the ground as the beam of light pierced through his forehead. He was good at camouflage and camouflage. His combat ability wasn't weak, but his defense was his weakness. He couldn't be compared to the greenscale dragon. Even a hard as skull couldn't resist Dean's solar rays. It was a one-hit kill. The four people at the back were scared out of their wits. Their mouths were wide open, and after being stunned for a second, they suddenly came to their senses and quickly fled in all directions. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 3 beams of light shot out from Dean's forehead. The special red bone was like a gem. The edges were diamond-shaped. It could shoot beams in different directions at the same time. 3 beams of light flew out and pierced through the heads of the 3 people who were about to escape. In the blink of an eye, there were 3 more corpses on the ground. Sure enough, the density of the light can be adjusted. Dean's eyes flashed. He had become more and more proficient in the use of solar rays. He had compressed the density of the solar rays to maximize the destructive power. He could only shoot 4 beams to reach the limit of his body. But if the density of the rays was adjusted to a lower level, then the number of rays could increase, but the corresponding destructive power would decrease. However, to deal with these people, even the solar rays, which had been reduced by 2 levels, could still kill them. Dean floated down and landed in front of the youth. He glanced at the watch in the youth's hand. He raised his hand and picked it up. The youth was like a sculpture as he let Dean take it. His body was stiff, and he didn't dare to move. Dean glanced at the watch and saw a virtual projection of himself. There was a string of numbers next to the projection. Heartbeat rate, thermal response, bone hardness, and so on. There seemed to be a series of comprehensive data below the data. At the moment, the data was fluctuating rapidly. It was more than 1. 2 million. Can this thing detect my strength? Dean was a little surprised. He had made a biological detector that could automatically sense life, but it could only sense the strength of the biological thermal response. Thermal response may not necessarily represent strength, but this wristwatch instrument was obviously much more advanced than the biological detector. Through the collected comprehensive data, a comprehensive score was obtained to assess the strength of the enemy. The technology contained in this small thing was very advanced. Elder, don't kill me. The youth hurriedly knelt down as if awakened from a dream. He looked at Dean in fear. He wanted to show the humblest gesture to beg for mercy. Chapter 10:16. Under the threat of death, Peter changed sides. Not only did he tell Dean everything, but he also helped Dean come up with a plan to sneak into Dean's hometown, the Demon Wall. Dean put the watch on his wrist. Through Peter's introduction, he already knew how to use the watch and what the data on it represented. The life energy sensed by the watch was the comprehensive data of physical strength. It could roughly judge the enemy's strength, but it wasn't 100% accurate. For example, if he knew how to hide his life fluctuations, it would be difficult for the watch to detect and give false information. Those with more than 100,000 life energy are likely to be from the Abyss. Those with more than 500,000 life energy are the Wall Lords of Balga. They are able to suppress many masters of the Abyss. It seems that I should have the strength of the Upper Abyss, or even stronger. Dean had a clearer understanding of his own strength through the information given by Peter. After all, the previous one, 2 million life energy, wasn't his full strength. Sir, the magic mark of the Demon Wall Lord of the Demon Wall is the Demon Devourer. Everyone in front of him will have their magic marks weakened by half. But as long as you find an opportunity to sneak attack from the dark, you will definitely be able to kill them, Peter said cleverly. Dean was a little surprised. magic marks weakened by half? What kind of ability is that? It's not the ability of the Demon Devourer. It is said that the Demon Devourer can devour other magic marks. That's why ordinary soul worms in front of the Demon Devourer would be afraid of meeting their natural enemy. They wouldn't be able to display their normal strength. But the situation is slightly better for legendary level magic marks. Ordinary people with magic marks wouldn't be able to display even 1/10 of their combat power in front of the Demon Devourer, Peter quickly explained. Dean didn't expect there to be such magic marks. There are many people with special abilities that he didn't know about. Sir, this is the 6th Devil Pit. We shouldn't stay here for long. Should we go back to the giant wall? Peter carefully looked at Dean and asked. There's no hurry. Dean bent down to pick up the instrument that had fallen to the ground. It looked like an electric box with a trumpet-like thing connected to it. There was soft cotton inside. It seemed to be some kind of special collector. He picked it up and looked at it. What is this? Peter hurriedly said. This is a demonic energy collector, specially used to detect the concentration of demonic energy in this demonic pit. In addition, we also need to collect the soil and demonic flesh here to bring back for research. Why are you doing this? Dean was curious. The giant wall couldn't even take care of itself. How would they dare to attack the Devil's Pit? Our duty is to look after the Devil Pit number 6. We have to report to the Empire if there is any abnormality. That's why we come here every month to collect the demonic energy. Peter's face was full of enthusiasm. He wanted Dean to feel his sincerity. Dean raised his eyebrows. No wonder the giant wall of Balga was able to create such a thing. It turned out that the giant wall had a special task. It was estimated that the connection between the giant wall and the Empire was far more convenient than the other giant walls. Even the Empire could get a lot of technology and knowledge from the Empire. Including resources, they also got certain rewards. Follow me. Dean threw the magic collector to him and rummaged through the rest of the corpses. He didn't find anything valuable, so he turned around and went back the way he came. Peter followed obediently behind with a magic aura collector in his arms. He did not try to escape. After a moment, Dean returned to Noyce and others. He said to Peter, "Lead the way to Balga." "Yes, Elder." Peter nodded respectfully and turned to lead the way. Noyce, Barton, and others were shocked when they saw Dean come back with a person. But they quickly reacted. There was a look of surprise in their eyes. It meant that there was a giant wall nearby. Moreover, the name that Dean said was obviously a place name. Noyce and others have long been looking forward to meeting other giant walls. They immediately followed Peter. Their hearts were full of expectations. Elder, Kashama had us send out an early warning signal, and it has been sent back to the giant wall. It is estimated that the giant wall will be on alert when we return, so we can only sneak in. Peter took the opportunity to talk to Dadian as he led the way over a hill. Dean raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect these people to do such a thing under his nose. He glanced at Peter. The latter even mentioned this matter. It was obvious that he had completely switched sides. He nodded. "Yes, you won't die as long as nothing happens to me." Peter was excited as he got Dean's promise. He knew that Dean would disdain to break his promise. "Thank you, Elder. I will do my best to help you. Tell me about the situation inside the giant wall and the number of Abyss-level masters." Dean said. Peter nodded. He was going to tell Dean even if Dean didn't ask. He knew that as long as Dean entered Paul's territory, he would be punished even if Dean died unless he set up a trap to kill Dean. However, such an opportunity was obviously unlikely to exist. Moreover, he could see that Dean's strength was far from an ordinary abyssal ability. He had completely knelt down in front of Dean when he killed Kashmo. His intuition told him that Dean's thigh was likely to be thicker than the Wall Lord's thigh. Of course, he had to hold on to Dean tightly. His intuition told him that Dean's thigh was probably thicker than that of the Wall Lord, so of course he had to hold on tight. In addition to Cassimo, there are 8 lords inside the giant wall who are stronger than Cassimo. Each lord has a deputy who is at the same level as Cassimo. Cassimo is Lord Hong Lien's deputy. This time it's Lord Hong Lien's turn to explore the 6th Devil Pit. Peter couldn't help but pause. He wanted to say that who knew that Cassimo would be so unlucky and arrogant to bring them to meet Dean. Otherwise, he wouldn't have died. After all, the deputies of the Eight Lords rarely met with mishaps when they explored the Devil Pit. So there are 16 Abyss-level masters and the Wall Lord? Dean's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. A mere giant wall had so many Abyss-level masters. In contrast, Sylvia didn't have a single ruler besides the Wall Lord. The gap was a bit too big. There are 3 Abyss-level masters under the Wall Lord. Their strength is on the same level as the Eight Lords, Peter quickly said. Dean smiled wryly. It seemed that he had encountered an extraordinary giant wall. No wonder the Empire had arranged for him to guard the Devil Pit. There should be similar giant walls around the other Devil Pits, and the strength of the Abyss-level masters should be similar. Elder doesn't have to worry. With your strength, you have the opportunity to rule this place. Peter saw Dean's helpless smile and was worried that Dean would retreat. If that was the case, then Dean wouldn't mind killing him. He quickly said, Elder, you were able to easily kill Cassimo. You should be stronger than the Eight Lords. Even the Wall Lord might not be your opponent. Although there are many of them, the strong aren't afraid of human wave tactics. Moreover, we are in the dark while they are in the light. We can completely break them one by one. Dean glanced at him. He didn't want to retreat, but felt that things were a bit troublesome. But Peter was very clever and flexible. Dean smiled and said, What's your plan? Let's hear it. Peter was surprised to see that Dean was still smiling. He didn't know if his words gave Dean confidence or if Dean had hidden cards. He thought for a moment and whispered, Elder, I know the residents of the Eight Lords. We can take them out and kill them one by one. When the others are aware of it, they will be on high alert. But we are in the dark. Even if they are on high alert, it will be useless. After a long time, they will slowly reveal flaws. Chapter 10:17. Dean smiled as he looked at Noyce and Barton. What do you think of this idea? Noyce whispered, Master, I think this method is feasible, but we could try to create traps. In case we were detected halfway, we can lure them into the trap and catch them in one fell swoop. Barton pondered. I think it's not too late to make plans after familiarizing ourselves with the situation inside the wall. After all, we don't know anything about the Porgia Wall. We can't just rely on his words. Sergei saw Dean look at him. Don't look at me. I'm not good at this kind of thing. Mason laughed. We can infiltrate into the middle level of their forces and find out their details. That way we will be foolproof. Peter couldn't help but take another look at them when he heard their words. It was obvious that they had thought things through more thoroughly than he had expected. He hurriedly added, My lords are right. We should stay in the shadows and not rush to act immediately. We should first understand the situation before we act. Dean smiled. Let's take a look first. Shortly after they finished their discussion, Peter led them to the wasteland outside the giant wall. The number of monsters in the surroundings had significantly decreased. The number of low-level monsters had increased. Peter was the first to notice the situation in the basin. He whispered, My lord, there are people in front of us. It should be a hunting team. Should we go around them? Dean waved his hand. Go and kill them. Yes, Elder. Peter nodded respectfully as he saw Dean's order. He sped up and sneaked into the basin. It didn't take long for him to return with 2 heads in his hand. Elder, it's just a few hunters. They should be out on a mission. I have disposed of all of them. Do you need me to disguise it as if they were killed by monsters? Go ahead. Dean nodded. Piddle immediately turned around and left with the 2 heads. Noyce whispered to Dean after Peter left. Master, this person can't be reused. Of course. Dean smiled. Peter had camouflaged the scene by the time Dean and the others entered the basin. Dean casually glanced around, but didn't find any flaws. It was obvious that it wasn't the first time Peter had done this kind of thing. The wall isn't far from here. It's about a few dozen miles away. Peter said respectfully as he saw Dudeen arrive. Dean nodded slightly and let him lead the way. It didn't take long for him to see the Burga Wall that Peter was talking about. The divine wall towered into the clouds and was over 1,000 meters tall. Its appearance was no different from Sylvia's. It was equally imposing and majestic, but one could vaguely see a large number of red heat sources on the wall. This should be the soldiers stationed on the wall. In terms of alertness, Sylvia could not be compared to her. Sir, I have a pass. I can enter directly, Peter hurriedly said. Dean shook his head. Use the pass to get in. The news of you returning to the wall will soon be known by your superiors. We will find an opportunity to sneak in. Peter was startled. He wanted to say something, but hesitated. But he nodded in the end. He didn't know if Dean was aware of something, or if he was really thinking about it. There was no doubt that using the pass would be beneficial to him. He could find an excuse to report the situation to Lord Honglian. At the same time, he could separate his relationship with Dean and the others. Although he didn't intend to betray Dean and the others, but at least if Dean and the others failed in the invasion, he would be able to separate himself and seek self-preservation. He could say that Dean and the others had sneaked in on their own, and it had nothing to do with him. After all, the soldiers guarding the wall may not remember the appearance of Dean and the others. Moreover, he could find someone to quietly kill the group of soldiers who had seen him leading Dean and the others into the city. If he entered through the secret passage, then once the matter was exposed, and he was investigated by the higher-ups, because he didn't have a pass to return to the giant wall, it would be inevitable that he would become the focus of suspicion. Peter was helpless, but he didn't dare to refute Dean. Moreover, he felt that Dean might not listen to him, even if he did refute. Instead, it would disintegrate the trust that he had built up. You guys find a place to rest. Peter, tell me about the situation of the giant wall. Dean ordered. Noyce immediately ordered his subordinates to find a place to hide and rest. At the same time, he sent people to patrol the area so as not to be seen by the hunting team. Peter saw that Dean had made up his mind, so he could only honestly tell Dean everything he knew about the guards. Dean pondered for a moment. Let's take a rest first and sneak in at night. The night came soon. Everyone took out purified water and food from their backpacks to restore their physical strength. Dean looked at Noyce and Barton. Take Peter and lead a monster to attack the city. Attract their attention. Yes, master. Noyce nodded. Peter smiled bitterly in his heart, but he put on a look of admiration and flattered, Sir is wise. Dean looked at the situation on the giant wall after they left. He saw that the guards were in the same rotation as Peter had said. He glanced at the others, apply cold crystal powder, and get ready to sneak in. All done. Macon grinned. Although he was about to sneak into the giant wall, where 20 abyssal monsters lived, but there wasn't much tension in his heart. It was as if he had returned to his childhood when he participated in scavenger training with Dean. No matter how dangerous the situation was, there was always a way to solve it. The other subordinates weren't as optimistic as Mason. All of them looked dignified and didn't dare to breathe. It didn't take long for an angry roar of a beast to echo from far away. Dean's eyes flashed as he looked towards the source of the sound. He saw Noyce, Barton, and Peter. There was a huge figure behind them. It was like a giant lion that was galloping and exuding exuberant heat. Wait here, Dean said as his figure disappeared into the night. Noyce and Barton ran as fast as they could. They wanted to attract a monster within their range, but it was obvious that these monsters were not goods for them to choose from. The monster they provoked was more than twice as strong as they had estimated. Fortunately, the giant wall was in front of them. If it was a little further, they would be desperate. Hurry, get to the giant wall. Noyce clenched his teeth as he encouraged Barton and Peter. Peter complained in his heart. Although he could escape from the monster's mouth, but Noyce and Barton would be finished. He didn't expect that the two trusted people of Dean would be so weak. They were only at inner Baron level. If he escaped alone, then Dean would pursue him. So he could only run behind Noyce and Barton. From time to time, he would turn back to block the crazy monster. Roar! The lion-like monster covered in blood-red fur roared angrily and sprinted forward. With a sudden leap, it pounced on Peter, who was at the back. Peter sensed movement behind him. He gritted his teeth and activated his demon form. Just as he was about to turn around to fight and slow down the monster's speed, his angry roar came to an abrupt halt, and he let out a kitten-like whine. Then he saw a godlike figure appear behind him, as if teleporting, both hands hugging the monster's front paws. Peter was relieved when he saw that it was Dean. He saw Dean twist his body and throw the monster towards the giant wall. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Several huge searchlights suddenly appeared on the giant wall. The snow-white light shone down and swayed in all directions. Soon, they found the giant lion monster that had fallen to the ground. Although the monster was thrown far away by Dean and rolled 7 or 8 times, it quickly climbed up. It did not seem to have suffered any serious injuries. When it was illuminated by the searchlight, it immediately roared in the direction of the source of the light. Whoosh! Whoosh! Noyce and Barton didn't wait for Dean to speak. They quickly turned around and ran to Dean's side. Dean grabbed them and shouted to Peter, "Retreat!" His figure flashed and disappeared into the darkness of the night with Noyce and Barton. Peter saw that he didn't get the same treatment. His mouth was bitter, but he didn't complain as he ran away in a hurry. At this time, the guards on the giant wall had been alerted by the giant lion monster, only to see a row of giant crossbows suddenly ejected from the giant wall, using the inertia of the fall, the momentum of the fall like lightning. However, the giant wall was thousands of meters high. Although the giant crossbow bolts were fast, their accuracy was off by a large margin. They shot around the giant lion monster, and their accuracy was skewed by more than 10 meters. Nevertheless, the lion monster was enraged and kept roaring at the giant wall. On the other side, Dean took Noyce and Barton back to the gathering place. He waited for Peter to catch up with them. He took the lead and quickly came to a passage under the giant wall. With his supervision, Dean saw 4 guards stationed in front of the passage under the wall, all of whom were pioneers. At this moment, they were stretching their heads to look in the direction of the beast's roar. They did not pay attention to the situation in front of them. In addition, the guards on the top of the giant wall had moved to the rightmost position of their patrol line. Although they were still on the patrol line, they obviously deviated from the center position. When the distance was close to 5 miles, Dean sped up and rushed out like a black light. There were no weeds outside the giant wall, so it wouldn't affect the vision of the guards. He could only sprint ahead. Suddenly, one of the guards seemed to notice something. He raised his wrist, and his face changed. "Someone is approaching." As soon as he finished his words, he saw a black lightning rushing towards him. His pupils shrank. Whoosh! A ray shot out from Dean's forehead and pierced through the guard who was about to call for help. The other 3 guards reacted. They panicked when they saw Dean's speed. It was too fast. It felt like a head-on collision with a giant beast. The next moment, they would be trampled to pieces. Fortunately, they were well-trained and immediately called for help after being stunned for a second. Whoosh! Another ray flew out and pierced through the forehead of the guard who was the first to react and call for help. At the same time, Dean's body was very close to them. The strong wind almost overturned the 2 guards. Dean used his other hand to pinch the neck of one of them. He used his other hand to pinch the neck of the other person. The other person's voice was extinguished. The one who was pinched by Dean was a woman. Her skin was white and she looked very pretty. Her eyes were wide open and her face was full of horror. Dean looked at her indifferently and knocked her out with his palm. Dean took out a small metal bottle from his pocket and opened the cap. He poured a drop of black blood into the mouth of the unconscious woman. Then he opened the passage and saw Noyce, Peter, and others quietly come over. Their bodies were covered with cold crystal powder, so they weren't noticed by anyone. Dean glanced at the wristwatch on the wrist of the first person he killed. This wristwatch was a bit similar to the one he robbed, but it seemed to be much simpler. He fiddled with it a few times and felt that the program was much simpler. He was unable to detect the life energy value. At this time, Noyce and the others had already arrived and quickly entered the passage. "My lord, this..." Peter looked at the corpses on the ground with an ugly expression. It wasn't because he felt sorry for the dead, but because if they were to be searched, they would inevitably be exposed, and the previous plan would fail. "Go in." Dean didn't tell him the details and whispered. Peter smiled in his heart as he quickly went into the passage. There were soldiers stationed on the other side of the passage, but they didn't expect the passage to suddenly open. They were knocked out before they could see what was going on. "Let's go." Dean led the way into the vast wilderness of the giant wall. Noyce, Peter, and the others followed closely behind, disappearing into the wilderness in the blink of an eye. Dean stopped as he was far away from the giant wall. He felt some pain in his chest. His heart couldn't withstand the burst of strength to stop the people from calling for help. Elder, if they see the bodies. Peter looked at Dean again. There was some complaints in his heart, but he didn't dare to say it out loud. Dean waved his hand. Don't worry. They haven't been on duty for long, so they won't replace them. The bodies will be destroyed by the time they replace them. It will be difficult to find traces. Peter was slightly taken aback and asked doubtfully, Did you set those corpses on fire? Dean glanced at him. Wasn't igniting the bodies the same as telling others that it was man-made? He turned to look at the giant wall in the distance. The movement there seemed to have calmed down. The giant lion monster should have been killed or scared away. The undead blood he poured into the woman's mouth should have played a role at this time. When the guards changed shifts tomorrow morning, it was estimated that the corpses and the unconscious man would have been eaten by the woman. Although it was a bit strange that the woman was accidentally infected as an undead, the death of a few guards was a small matter. Generally, it would not alarm the higher-ups. As for the guards stationed inside the giant wall, they didn't know what happened. Even if someone reported, but there was no evidence, they wouldn't be able to find out anything. Let's find a place to rest. Dean didn't stay any longer as he looked at Peter. Find a way to get a legal identity for all of us as soon as possible. Remember that you're also smuggled in. Peter's heart skipped a beat, and he smiled bitterly in his heart. But he put on a respectful expression and said, My lord, I have long decided to live and die with you. We are on the same boat, and I will never betray you. Lead the way. Dean waved his hand. Chapter 10:18. There was no distinction between the inner and outer walls of the giant wall. The king's city was located in the central area of the giant wall. The territories of the 8 lords surrounded the king's city. Each lord managed more than a dozen cities, hundreds of towns, and countless villages. Dean and the others came to a remote village under Peter's lead. The village was close to the wilderness. There were sharp fences outside the village to resist the wolves and beasts that wandered over the wasteland. There were ordinary residents in the village. The young and strong had gone to the nearby towns to work for the farmers or run small businesses. There were some old people and children left in the village. There was a blacksmith shop, a tavern, and a grocery store in the village. The owners of the shops were still sleeping at home during the day. There wasn't much business throughout the year, so they could barely get enough food and clothing. On the muddy gravel path in the middle of the village, there were several roosters pecking at the worms in the mud. The arrival of Dean and the others scared the roosters away. A woman came out of the roadside house with a wooden basin full of dirty clothes. She was going to wash clothes in the nearby river. She stopped when she saw Dean and the others in the village and looked at them nervously. Peter's figure flashed and appeared in front of the woman. The woman was startled and threw the wooden basin in her hand. Peter picked up the basin and asked with a kind smile, "Where is the village head?" It was rare for the village woman to see such a handsome young man. Moreover, he was so close to her, and with one glance, she could tell that he was a big shot with an extraordinary status. Her cheeks were burning hot as she nervously stammered, Village chief is in the manor in front. You're looking for village chief for something?" "Thank you." Peter smiled as he retracted his figure and respectfully said to Dean, "Elder, please come with me." He led the way to the end of the gravel path and saw a manor surrounded by wooden fences. It was called a manor, but in fact it was a slightly sturdy wooden house. The area of the fences wasn't big. There was a dog and a cage of chickens inside. The dog was tied up, but at the moment it sensed the smell of the strangers, it immediately went mad and bared its teeth. Peter glared at it coldly, his murderous aura filling the air. The black dog was stunned and looked at him in fear. It shrank into a corner of the house, not daring to bark again. At this time, the dog's barking alerted the people in the house. A gray-haired old man with a cane walked out. He was wearing rough linen clothes, and there was an old metal clip in his chest pocket. He seemed to have some temperament. He was startled when he saw Peter standing outside and Dean and others behind him. His old eyes widened a bit. He could see that Dean and others were extraordinary just from their clothes and temperament. "You are the village chief here." Peter no longer had the amiable expression he had when he spoke to the village woman. Instead, he revealed a condescending and arrogant expression. "We're from the Red Lotus Corps, and we need to gather some resources. Prepare them immediately. The village chief's face turned pale when he heard the words Red Lotus cores. His stooped body became even more crooked. His wrinkled face was full of uneasiness. Sir, may I ask what resources you need? Our land is barren, and we don't have anything, I'm afraid. Cut the crap. If you can't get it, then prepare to go to jail and die. Peter interrupted him. The village chief trembled at his scolding and didn't dare to open his mouth again. Prepare 30 sets of clothes. I'll give you half an hour. Peter said arrogantly. The village chief was startled and hurriedly said, Sir, we only have coarse clothes here. We don't have any silk or brocade. I can't even get one set. Peter's brows furrowed, and after some deliberation, he said, Then prepare 30 sets of linen clothes. Be quick. If you delay us, you can't afford to pay for it with your old life. The village chief was relieved. Although the village was poor, they could still gather 30 sets of linen clothes. Sir, please wait for a moment. I'll go find them right away. The village chief nodded and bowed. He waited for Peter's permission before walking away. The old man felt suffocated as he passed by Dean and the others. It was as if he was walking past a group of ferocious beasts. It seemed that he would be torn apart at any moment. It didn't take long for the village chief to come back with a strong man. The man's wrists were rough and stained with the smell of iron. He was a blacksmith in the village and had a fiery temper. But at the moment his burly body was shivering and his face was nervous. He was carrying a sack with linen clothes inside. The quantity is correct, right? Peter opened the sack and asked with a frown. The village chief quickly replied, Absolutely correct. I counted them myself. He had deliberately sent 5 more sets in order to prevent the count from being wrong. Peter estimated that the village chief wouldn't dare to play tricks. He looked at Dean for instructions. Dean nodded and turned away. One of the confidants easily picked up the sack on the ground and followed behind the crowd. The group of people left the village. The village chief and blacksmith sighed as they watched Dean and the others leave. They felt cold sweat dripping down their foreheads. The humble look on the village chief's face disappeared. He looked at the blacksmith and asked, Is it possible that they are imposters? The blacksmith laughed bitterly. Old Lou, you know that I used to be a scavenger and have seen many big shots. In my opinion, these people are not only from the Red Lotus Corps, but also possibly from one of the Trump Card Corps. But I don't know why they are collecting materials here. Moreover, they are just tattered linen clothes. The village chief was startled. Don't tell anyone about this. Just pretend that it didn't happen. Do you understand? How could the blacksmiths not know the stakes involved? Being associated with such a big shot would not benefit them at all. Old Lou, you should say this to those women. They saw it and will definitely ask all sorts of questions later. I'll warn them. I hope this matter will pass and there won't be any follow-up. Dean and the others came to the wilderness after leaving the village. They opened the sack and poured out the clothes inside. There were 5 more than what Peter wanted. Dudian immediately ordered everyone to put on linen clothes. He left behind the hunter tools and the baggage and handed it over to Sergei. He told him to find a remote place in the wilderness to hide and guard it. You wait here. We'll pick you up after we settle down. Dean said to Sergei. No problem. You go ahead. I'm not good at this kind of thing. Sergei patted his bald head and said to Dean. Dean took Noyce, Barton, and others to follow Peter. They didn't look so conspicuous after changing into linen clothes. But if one observed carefully, then they would be able to see the difference at a glance. After all, they were people who had been fighting on the edge of life and death for a long time. Their temperament was different from ordinary people. Each of them had straight backs and sharp eyes. They weren't like ordinary villagers who were hunched and had low spirits. The plan is to sneak into the major forces and understand the situation. Then we'll listen to the next instructions. Dean told Noyce and others about his thoughts and plans. Your task is to infiltrate into major forces before there are new instructions. Mix as far as you can, just like in Sylvia. Mason licked his lips and excitedly said, Can we attack after we figure out the situation? It depends on the situation. Don't think about starting a war. Maybe there won't be a war this time. We're just passers-by. We can stay here safely and have enough resources for us to use. Our purpose is satisfied, Dean said in a serious tone. Mason was disappointed, but soon understood that it was the safest plan. Peter's eyes lit up when he heard Dean's words. It seemed that Dean didn't have much confidence in invading the giant wall. He didn't have much interest in it either. It would be the safest if he could hold on until Dean and others left quietly. Barton and other confidants were relieved. Although the previous plan was to nibble away the abyss inside the giant wall and eventually control the giant wall. The plan was feasible, but after all the opponents were 20 abyss. Moreover, Peter didn't know about the existence of the abyss. It was too dangerous to rely on Dean alone. It was best to get along with him peacefully. Noyce had been with Dean for the longest time, so he had the deepest understanding of Dean's thoughts. He wasn't happy as he heard Dean's words. Instead, his heart sank. He knew that Dean wasn't a pacifist. He thought of Dean's words before he left Sylvia. Dean didn't have a heart, so he could die at any time. It was obvious that even if Dean attacked the giant wall and concealed the news of this place like Peter said, but sooner or later the kingdom of God would know about it in 2 or 3 years. All of them would suffer without Dean's protection. In addition, Dean let them sneak into the forces. This was mostly because he was worried that in case he suddenly died, they could stay in the giant wall and continue to live. There would be a shelter. Noyce's nose turned sour as he looked at the people around him who had relaxed. He felt bitter in his heart. Perhaps only he knew about Dean's good intentions. This indifferent and cruel boy was more simple and serious than anyone else. Afterwards, Dean asked Peter to lead them to get a new identity. Peter hadn't done such a thing before, but it didn't hinder his understanding of these things. He immediately brought Dean and the others to a nearby village and found the household registration office. Under the threat of force and financial resources, they quickly purchased 3 identities. In fact, in this small village, he was fully capable of purchasing the identities of all the people, but Dean explained that he would only purchase 3 identities. The rest of the people would go to other villages or cities to purchase their identities. After all, the authority of this village to purchase identities was limited to the nearby villages. If they were to mix with the higher-ups and their background was found out, then it would inevitably attract attention if they appeared in several villages. Dean used the 3 identities for himself, Noyce, and one of his confidants. All 3 of them were ordinary residents of different villages, so they were exempted from slavery. Dean rented a few hotels for Barton and the others to rest. Then he strolled around the town. Although he couldn't see the whole picture, but he had a clearer understanding of the Burga's wall through the environment of the town. Because there were few houses in the town that looked grand, but unexpectedly there were light bulbs in the houses of the big families. There was a saying that the industry wouldn't be too bad if there was electricity. It seems that the giant wall is basically in line with the empire. Dean couldn't help but smile. This was good news for him. He needed a lot of materials to make experimental instruments. Dean went back to the hotel and looked at Noyce. Go to the nearest big city and find a force to rely on as soon as possible. I'll give you 1 month to mix up and take them to get an identity. Noyce nodded. Yes, young master. Peter was stunned. Elder, what about me? I'll do small things like buying identities. You stay by my side, Dean said. Peter was dumbfounded and couldn't help but smile in his heart. It seemed that Dean wasn't completely at ease with him. He sighed in his heart, but felt that it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. The less he did for Dean, the safer he would be. You are in charge of taking care of them, Dean said to Noyce's confidant. She was a woman in black. Lucy nodded respectfully. Yes, master. Barton, you will stay in the town with her for the time being. Once Noyce gets famous, I'll buy you an identity. I'll go to the nearby cities to try my luck, Dean said to Barton and others. Barton, Aurora, and the others were a bit reluctant, but they still nodded in agreement. Dean left the town with Peter after making arrangements for Barton and the others. They rented a carriage and went to a nearby big city. All the money they used along the way was Peter's. He had saved a lot of money over the years as a subordinate of Lord Honglian. He had saved a lot of money in the 4 major banks in Bolgia Wall. Taking out a small amount of money was enough to feed hundreds of people. Peter had entered the city illegally, so it was inconvenient to expose his identity. But he had the medal of Red Lotus Legion. He could enter the city directly after showing the medal. Even the entrance fee was waived. Dean didn't stay in the city. He changed to a hired carriage and went to the next city. Along the way, they passed a small town. Dean asked Peter to buy him a new identity. 2 days later, Peter and Dean arrived at the main city of the Eight Lords. It was the residence of the Phoenix Lord. Chapter 10:19. It would be difficult for Peter to enter Phoenix City with his Red Lotus Legion medal. He had to provide proof of identity and an entrance fee. Fortunately, he had applied for a new identity along the way. Even though he was an ordinary villager, he was still eligible to enter the city. Piddle took him to the recruitment association in the city, as Dean wanted to look for a job. The recruitment association was a large building that occupied a large area. The plaza and the main hall were filled with people. There were more than 10 seats in the plaza, which were set up by the recruitment office. There was a long queue in front of each seat, and a large number of job seekers were lining up with their resumes and identification cards in their hands. Dean and Peter squeezed into the hall. They saw that there were many job recruitments written on the bulletin board. It was a little noisy inside. Dean frowned as he carefully looked at all the recruitment jobs. Peter asked in a low voice, "Elder, what's wrong? Is there no job you like? What is the name of the institution that studies monsters?" Dean asked in a low voice. Peter was startled. "Elder, do you want to work in the academy? Their recruitment isn't here. They only recruit commoners. The members of the School of Magic are directly recruited from the School of Magic. If you want to enter the School of Magic, you need to have a very good brain. However, there are no requirements for household registration. You can first enter the School of Magic to get a graduation certificate. Then you can apply for a job in the School of Magic. How long will it take to get a graduation certificate? It will take at least 2 or 3 years. There are a lot of things to learn. It's too slow." Dean dispelled the idea and continued to search back and forth among the jobs. Peter expected that Dean wouldn't go to the Magic Research Institute. He quietly accompanied Dean and waited for him to make a choice. Dean soon found 3 jobs. They were a piano apprentice, a gardener for the Stantine family, and a chef for the Bourne family. The requirements for these 3 professions were the highest, and, among them, the pianist apprentice was the most respected. Even in the recruitment association, the pianist apprentice was a very popular profession. Once they were successful, they might become a pianist in the future. If they could compose 1 or 2 beautiful pieces of music, they would be loved by the nobles, and they would have endless wealth and a transcendent status. Many nobles and wealthy people were proud to receive an invitation from a famous pianist. One could imagine how high the status of a pianist was. This was an artist. The other 2 professions were more ordinary. They were just working for large families, and their salaries were much higher than those of ordinary gardeners and chefs. However, they were also very demanding on their skills. Dean queued up at the next window to receive the recruiter's information. After waiting in line for half an hour, he successfully obtained the recruitment information for the 3 professions, especially the addresses. "Let's go." Dean didn't apply, but turned away. Peter was puzzled as he followed Duddian out of the association. "Elder, didn't you want to apply for a job? Let's investigate first," Duddian said. Duddian soon found the place where the pianist apprentice worked. It was a busy street with a dense flow of people. Carriages were parked everywhere on the roadside. The carriages were luxuriously decorated, and there were guards waiting for the owner to come back from shopping. In such a place, there was a huge piano room with a width of nearly 20 meters. There was a recruitment notice hanging on the door. Not only the pianist apprentice, but also the waiters, guards, and other occupations were recruited. Dean and Peter had just reached the door when the guard stopped them. "What can I do for the 2 of you?" Dean didn't answer. His eyes swept inside and saw that there were many pianos in the huge piano room. In addition, there was a rest area. There were sporadic nobles dressed in bright colors. There were special family badges on their clothes. In addition, there was melodious piano music floating from the inside. It was refreshing. Sure enough, it's a job that can get in touch with the upper class. Dean was ready to turn around and leave. The guard who stopped them was impatient. "If there's nothing, then leave." Don't block the way. This isn't a place for civilians like you to come." Peter's blood boiled when he heard this, and he almost wanted to slap the guard across the face. As the trump card of the Red Lotus Corps, he was a high and mighty ruler. No matter where he went, he was treated like a big boss. Well, had he ever been humiliated and looked down upon like this? However, when he thought of his current status, he gritted his teeth and endured it. All he did was glare coldly at the guard, his eyes filled with killing intent. The guard's scalp tingled as he stared at him. Dean turned around and left. He wasn't angry. Peter quickly caught up with him. He asked Dadian, "Elder, are you not satisfied with this place?" "It's okay. Let's look at the other two places," Dadian said. Soon, they hired a carriage and arrived in front of the Stantine family's manor. It was also a prime location, surrounded by jewelers' shops and grand hotels. However, the streets in front of the manor were sparsely populated. Everyone who passed by seemed to consciously stay away from the side of the manor. Even when they passed by the gate, they could not help but quicken their pace, not daring to stop for even a moment. A dozen knights in silver armor stood in front of the Stantine family's manor. They stood as straight as javelins, their auras sharp and cold. Their cold eyes seemed to contain cold electricity. Every time a passerby passed by, they would feel as if needles were stabbing their backs, making them uncomfortable. In addition, there were 4 dogs next to the knights. All of them were 2-headed dogs. They were half the height of a person and looked like a pony. They had black fur and sharp fangs. It seemed that they could pounce at any time and bite the throat of the pedestrian. Dean and Peter got off the carriage and went to the front of the manor. Looking at the manor, they could feel the majesty of the atmosphere. But with his supervision, Dean could see through the gaps in the iron fences of the manor. There were many gardeners working on the green lawn. There were also maids in white clothes playing with several children on the manor path. Golden light flashed in Dean's eyes. The layers of walls in the manor were penetrated. Everyone appeared in his field of vision, including a few sentries in the dark who were suppressing their heat to a very low level. 1 master, 8 pioneers. Dean's eyes flashed. He didn't expect a random family to be so powerful that it could even subvert the entire Sylvia Empire. After thinking for a moment, he turned and left. "Elder, the Stantine family is an old family in Phoenix City, but they're declining day by day. Many of their properties have been annexed by other families. But I heard that the 3rd daughter of this generation is quite talented in fighting. She has become a disciple of the Phoenix Lord. I estimate that in a few years, the Stantine family will be able to restore its former glory or even stronger." Peter followed behind Dean and explained. "You know quite a lot," Dean said indifferently. Peter laughed and said, "After all, I live here. I know a little about these things." Dean didn't say much. He hired a carriage and went to the Bourne family's territory. The Bourne family lived on the other side of the city. It was a long way, but it was also on the west side of Phoenix City. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent recruitment letters to the same recruitment association. When they arrived at the destination, Dean found that the Bourne family's momentum was obviously weaker than the Stantine family's. The walls were much shorter and not majestic enough. The iron fences were a little rusty and looked old. There were many withered yellow grass on the lawn of the manor. There were only 8 knights guarding the door, but each knight had a python coiled around their body. It was a chilling sight. If one were to say that there were still a few pedestrians outside the Stantine Manor, then the area in front of the Bourne Manor was completely empty. Not a single person could be seen. Even the entire street nearby had very little traffic. My lord, the Bourne family is notorious. They have always been caught up in accusations of child abuse. Many people have witnessed their family members abusing children, but they don't dare to go against them because they are alone. Peter looked at the Bourne family's manor in front of him. There was a trace of disdain in his eyes. Although he was fierce and had killed many people, he was still disgusted by those who abused children. Dean felt the eyes of the 8 knights at the door fall on the 2 of them. Their eyes were cold. If it was an ordinary person, they would have already turned and left in a hurry. But he looked calm and didn't care. A golden light flashed in his eyes. Soon, the situation in the Bourne family's manor fell into his eyes. Sure enough, The number of guards inside the manor was far less than the Stantine families. But in terms of a number of experts, the Bourne family was actually stronger than the Stantine family. There was a ruler, 10 pioneers, and a figure who didn't emit any heat. They were all suppressed, but they were sitting in the same room as another ruler. They seemed to be playing chess. Of course, the chess here was Western chess. Most of the people in the giant wall, like Sylvia, were inclined to have a Western face. Suddenly, Dean's eyes moved and a trace of surprise flashed in them. Soon, the golden light in his eyes disappeared. He said, "Apply for the job here." Peter was stunned and asked in surprise why. Dean didn't explain. He walked to the 8 knights at the door. He was 7 or 8 meters away from them. His face showed a nervous look. "I am here to apply for a chef position. Do you recruit chefs here?" The 8 knights frowned. One of them said in a cold voice, "If you want to apply, go to the Recruiters Association. We have already submitted the recruitment information to them. We don't accept private applications." Dean understood and quickly said, "Thank you." Then he quickly turned and left. As he hurried away, he could clearly hear the 8 knights sneering behind him. They seemed to think that his fleeing figure was a bit funny. It brought a trace of fun to their boring life as guards. Peter saw Dean escape and sighed in his heart. He thought he was good at disguising, but the youth in front of him was better than him. Moreover, there wasn't the slightest trace of anger on his face. He wasn't deliberately suppressing it, but he really wasn't angry. This was the demeanor of a strong person. He was flexible and wouldn't lower himself to the same level as watchdogs. Peter was full of admiration and soon showed it on his face. He left with Dean and said in admiration, "Elder, do you really want to work for the Bourne family? I think they are notorious and wouldn't treat their subordinates well. Of course, they won't be a threat to you with your strength, but it's easy to be exposed. It's okay. I have my own plans." Dean waved his hand and returned to the Recruiters Association. Soon, both of them squeezed into the hall and looked at the recruitment information. The Bourne family's information was still there, but the information for piano apprentices and Stantine family's garters was gone. Sure enough, the Bourne family is notorious. No one is willing to work for them. Moreover, the salary is so low. Peter chuckled. That's exactly what I wanted. Dean was very satisfied as he waited in line. After a moment, it was his turn. He submitted his identity card, but was told by the brown-haired beauty behind the counter that he also needed to provide his chef certificate. Dean patted his head. He had forgotten about it. He withdrew from the crowd with a wry smile. The Recruiters Association was very responsible, as they didn't dare to recommend anyone to the employer. He could only honestly follow the procedure. He asked Peter, "Where can I get a chef's certificate?" Peter was annoyed. "Oh, I forgot about that. It's very easy to get a chef's certificate. You can either go to a chef's college and get a chef's certificate after graduation, or go to a chef's training school to study. I suggest that we go to a chef's training school. As long as you know a thing or two and spend some money, it's very easy to buy a certificate." Dean nodded. A certificate was a stepping stone to a job, and money was the highway to get a certificate. They soon found a chef's training school. Peter paid 100 gold coins and directly bought a senior chef certificate. Within the scope of money, a senior chef certificate was the limit. As for a master certificate, one would need to bribe more people and spend 10 times or even 100 times more money. One must know that 100 gold coins was equivalent to the salary of a senior chef for 10 years. Moreover, buying a certificate didn't necessarily mean that you were a senior chef. If you didn't have some cooking skills, you would soon be fired. Therefore, generally, no one would be stupid enough to buy a senior chef certificate. However, some rich kids were an exception. The certificate could help them increase their social network, and it could also be used to show off. Of course, nobles wouldn't buy these civilian certificates. Generally, they would buy a pianist's certificate to gild their identity. After getting the certificate, the two returned to the Recruitment Association. The Bourne family's recruitment was still going on. Soon, Dean successfully applied for a senior chef certificate. After all, he only needed to be an intermediate chef. Chapter 10:20. Elder, you're going to the Bourne family. Where should I go? Peter and Dean walked out of the Recruitment Association together. He saw that Dean didn't want him to join the Bourne family, so he asked with a reluctant face. Dean glanced at him. Find a job near the Bourne family and wait for me to dispatch you. It's best not to leave the radius of 30 miles from the Bourne family. You should understand the consequences if I can't perceive you. Peter was secretly shocked. A perception range of 30 miles? He was also a person with excellent perception ability. He could perceive movement from 30 miles away in the wilderness, but his perception wasn't clear. In the Phoenix main city, which was filled with people, not to mention sensing 30 miles, even locking onto a person who was 10 miles away was incomparably difficult. After all, this was not something that could be achieved by simply relying on smell and hearing. My lord, Peter has always been loyal to you. I hope you won't be suspicious of me. I will never betray you. We're on the same boat. Although he was shocked, Peter's reaction wasn't slow, and he hurriedly said with a respectful smile. Dean indifferently said, "That's for the best. I hope you're a smart person. Even if my identity is leaked, it will be very difficult for the people here to keep me here. You should know how terrifying an Avenger hiding in the dark is if I escape." Peter smiled bitterly in his heart. He naturally knew this. It was because of this that he didn't think of betraying Dean and secretly snitching. After all, if Dean survived, then his situation would be dangerous. It was absolutely a thankless task. Moreover, he wouldn't be able to explain it to Lord Honglien. He couldn't say that he deliberately used a scheme to lure them over. Lord Honglien might not believe him and would only think that he was greedy for life and afraid of death. The two once again went to the Bourne family's residence after hiring a carriage. Dean asked Peter to wait on the street. He came to the entrance of the manor alone with the application certificate issued by the Recruitment Association. The 8 knights looked at him. They obviously remembered Dean. When they saw the Recruitment Association certificate in Dean's hand, they slightly raised their eyebrows. There was a touch of mockery in the corners of their mouths. It seemed that there was another meaning behind it. I'm here to apply for a job as a chef. This is the certificate issued by the Recruitment Association. He handed over the certificate. The python that was coiled around the knight's shoulder slightly raised its head. Its vertical pupils were staring at Dean. It seemed that it would pounce on him at any time. The knight was also worried that the serpent on his shoulder would suddenly attack Dean. He reached out and touched the head of the serpent to calm it down. Then he took Dean's certificate and looked at Dean at the same time. He was a little surprised. As a civilian, Dean's face showed no fear. If an ordinary person saw the pets on their body, most of them would have been scared to death. He didn't think too much about it. His gaze fell on the certificate. He flipped it over and saw the seal on it. It was indeed from the Recruitment Association. He immediately nodded and said, "Come with me. I'll take you to see the butler." After saying that, he turned around, pushed open the door, and led the way. Dean followed him into the gate. He looked back to see that the gate was closed by the knights on both sides. His eyes looked through the iron bars and saw Peter on the street. Both of them knew each other's intentions as soon as their eyes met. Peter nodded slightly and turned away. Dean retracted his gaze and slowly walked behind the knight in front of him. At the same time, he casually looked at the scenery in the manor. There weren't many servants in Bourne Manor. Along the way, he saw 2 old gardeners trimming the landscape trees. There were sprinklers in the middle of the lawn. Some were still spraying, while others had water cut off. It was obvious that there was a malfunction in the equipment. It couldn't be compared with the Stantine family. There was a bleak and dilapidated feeling. It seemed that this was a declining aristocratic family. Over the hillside, Dean saw a forest in front of him. There were several towering buildings behind the trees. They were hundreds of meters high, and the architectural style was inclined towards Gothic. There was a strange, gloomy feeling, and it gave people a very quiet feeling. When they reached the edge of the woods, Dean saw a chubby boy squatting on the grass. He was about 5 or 6 years old. He was squatting on the grass and was playing with something. He looked like an ordinary child playing with stones on the side of the road. When the knight saw the little fatty, he bowed respectfully and greeted, "Young Master Leo." The little fatty was surprised. He turned around and stood up from the ground. At this time, Dean saw that his hands were covered with blood, very sticky, like bright red pulp. Looking from between his legs, there was a skinned rabbit lying on the ground. The whole body was dripping with blood. The rabbit head was twisted 180 degrees. Dean slightly frowned as he looked at the little fatty. The little fatty stared at the knight and Dean. He didn't speak, but his eyes were very strange. The knight felt a little uncomfortable under his gaze. He forced a smile and said, "Young master, this is the new chef. He will make delicious food for you in a while. I will take him to report to the butler first." Then he quickened his pace and walked forward. The little fatty watched them leave. Dean looked back and saw that the little fatty was still staring at their backs. "Here we are." At this time, the knight's voice came from the front. Dean looked up. They had arrived in front of a towering building along the gravel path. There was a lot of moss on the ground. It looked like an old building that had been in disrepair for a long time. There was a huge bat pattern on the door. It was making threatening gestures and grinning, revealing its extremely long fangs. There were two expressionless knights stationed at the door. After the knight explained the purpose of their visit, they opened the door for the two of them. It was dark inside the door, and the cold air swept out from inside, making Dean feel that the surrounding temperature had dropped a few degrees. Looking from the side, he clearly saw that the knight's face was a little stiff and unnatural, but he still lifted his foot and walked in. The light was dim in the cold building. There was only one lit lamp. The flickering light was lonely and cold. Dean's line of sight was not affected by the darkness. He saw an empty throne above the building. On both sides of the stone pillars stood knights in black armor. Their bodies were almost integrated with the darkness. It was difficult to see them clearly. They stood motionless like stone sculptures. At this time, a young woman dressed like a maid came from the darkness. Her face was snow white. There was a kind of soul-stirring beauty. She smiled at the knight who led the way. "Who is this person?" The knight saw her and hurriedly bowed. "This is the candidate recommended by the Recruitment Association. He is applying for a chef position." He handed over Dean's certificate. The young woman didn't take it. She just glanced at it and nodded slightly. "Wait here. I'll call the butler." After saying that, her body seemed to float away. Her footsteps were silent, and there were no ups and downs. Chapter 10:21. It didn't take long for the enchanting maid to come back, followed by a figure in a black tuxedo. This was a middle-aged man with pale skin, dark blue eyes, deep eye sockets, and a high-nose bridge, which made his cheeks have a very three-dimensional outline. He was very handsome. His face was indifferent as he looked at Dean for a moment. He took the certificate from the guide knight and looked at it. Dean's identity information was recorded on it. He nodded slightly. "Senior chef? My salary here is only 20 silver coins a month. Are you willing?" Dean's face showed disappointment. He hesitated. Can I add a little more?" The middle-aged butler frowned slightly. He pondered for a moment and said, "Considering that you are a senior chef, I will raise your salary by 5 silver coins. If you are willing, you can stay. If not, you can leave." Dean hesitated for a moment and finally showed a determined look. "I am willing." The middle-aged butler slightly raised his eyebrows. He was a little surprised. His dark blue eyes slightly narrowed as he stared at Dean. "Why? With your conditions, you should be able to find a better place." "I'm in urgent need of money." Dean lowered his head. It seemed that it was difficult for him to speak. His hands kept rubbing his clothes. He looked very restrained and nervous. The middle-aged butler's eyes showed a flash of understanding. He indifferently said, "Let's make it clear in advance that you have to work here for at least a year. You can't leave halfway. Otherwise, you should know the price of violating the labor contract. However, since you are in urgent need of money, I can predict your salary for 3 months in advance. What do you think?" Dean showed a look of great joy and looked at him gratefully. "Thank you, sir." The butler indifferently smiled and said to the maid next to him, "Angela, take him to the kitchen. By the way, see his cooking skills. It just so happens that the second miss is hungry. Let him make a pastry and send it to her." "Yes, butler." The charming maid smiled and nodded. Then she winked at Dean playfully. "Mr. Chef, please come with me." Dean blushed. He bowed his head and followed her step by step. Angela took Dean through the hall to the back of the hall. They went around several rooms and passed through a door. The kitchen was at the back of the building. As soon as Dean entered the kitchen, he saw 3 people in chef's clothes sitting on wooden benches in the open space outside the kitchen playing cards. Seeing Angela's arrival, the 3 of them were shocked. They hurriedly stood up and said respectfully, "Greetings, Miss Angela. Why are you here?" Angela glanced at the 3 and slightly frowned. "Why? Can't I come here?" The 3 hurriedly waved their hands. One of them laughed and said, "Of course you can come here, Miss Angela. You are still as beautiful as usual. Hey, who is this person?" Angela was already immune to his flattery. With a calm expression, she waved her hand and said, "This is the new chef. He's younger than you, but he's a high-level chef. You should learn from him in the future. Now, get out of here. I want to see his culinary skills." The 3 of them looked at Dean in surprise. They didn't expect the youth in linen clothes to be a senior chef. The 3 of them heard Angela's words. Their eyes flashed as they looked at each other. They smiled and bowed their heads to leave. After the 3 left, Angela closed the kitchen door and walked to Dean with enchanting steps. She gently raised her hand and lifted Dean's chin. Her snow-white cheeks were full of charm. She stretched out her sexy tongue and licked her lips. "Mr. Chef, you are so handsome." Dean was startled. He saw the desire in her eyes. His fingers slightly clenched but soon loosened. He blushed and said, "Miss Angela, you are joking. What dish do you want me to cook to prove my cooking skills?" Angela grinned and turned to Dean's cheek. Their lips almost touched. Dean could smell the strong fragrance from her body, which made him feel strangely excited. He leaned back slightly and reluctantly smiled. "Miss Angela, you seem to be too close." Angela saw Dean's shy look, and her eyes lit up. She used her fingers to lift Dean's chin and said in a soft voice, "The dish to prove that you are a chef is in front of you. Don't you want to taste it?" Dean smiled bitterly in his heart. "Miss Angela, if we don't make pastries quickly, will the second miss wait too long?" Angela's upper body was leaning on Dean's body. Her body was soft and warm. Her fingers gently tapped on Dean's chest. She was very playful and had a fatal temptation. "Mr. Chef, don't you want it? I'm like this. Don't you understand my mind? Do you like to be passive?" She looked up at Dean. Dean sighed in his heart and hugged her body. "Of course I like to take the initiative." Angela felt that she was strangled by Dean's arm, and her eyes showed a bit of intoxication. She said, "I like you like this." Her words stopped abruptly, and her head hung down on Dean's shoulder. Her body also softened. Dean gently put her body to the side. His face had returned to indifference like ice. He turned to the kitchen sink and turned on the faucet. He washed his hands several times and then turned off the faucet. He looked at the kitchen. It could be seen that the technology of the entire giant wall of Berga was widespread. In Sylvia, water needed to be scooped from the well. But here, underground water pipes and pumps were used. Dean opened the cabinet and found flour and some ingredients. He began to cook in the kitchen. Soon, a steamed Western-style pastry came out of the oven. He turned and opened the kitchen door. 3 figures fell in. They were the previous 3 chefs. The 3 hurriedly climbed up and quickly looked around. They saw Angela lying on the ground and seemed to be asleep. They were surprised but soon recovered and said in an embarrassed tone, How are you?" Dean frowned as he saw the eyes of the 3 chefs. He suddenly remembered that he had overlooked something. He stood in front of Angela and asked, "What kind of pastry does Miss Angela like?" "Sweet, sweet," the 3 quickly said. Duddy nodded, pulled up the kitchen door, and slammed it shut. Then he turned around and pushed aside Angela's clothes on the floor, making her look disheveled. He then got up to wash his hands and made another pastry. This time, he added a lot of sugar and fruit juice. After he was done, he opened the kitchen door. The 3 chefs were sitting not far away. They stretched their heads and looked through the door. They didn't look carefully before, but now they saw that Angela's clothes were obviously fiddled with. The outline of her chest was clearly visible. It was very attractive. The 3 chefs came over and gave a thumbs up to Dean. "Brother, you are amazing." Chapter 1022. Is this the second Mrs. Pastry? The three were slightly surprised. One of them, a bearded middle-aged man, quickly said, "The second miss lives in the 6th room on the 2nd floor. You can send it to her." Dean nodded slightly and left with the pastry. Not far after he walked out of the kitchen, he suddenly heard the three people whispering behind him. "Hey, how can you let him send the food to the second miss? We haven't tasted it yet. What if it's not good? You know the second miss's temper. If she's not satisfied with the food, then this brother will be miserable. You two idiots, didn't you hear what Miss Angela said? He's a high-class chef, and he's so young. Even Angela is interested in this pretty boy. If he stays here in the future, won't he be in charge of the kitchen? At that time, all three of us will be his subordinates. If he is driven away, then we can live a stable life." Well, that's true. This kid is quite lucky with women. TSK, that be asterisk TCH, Angela likes this kind of pretty boy. Shoo, if Angela hears you, she will peel your skin. What are you afraid of? Didn't you see that she fell asleep? She must be very happy. Dean walked further and further away, but he could still hear the words of the three clearly. He slightly raised his eyebrows, but his footsteps did not stop. He still carried the pastry to the stairs, and then went up step by step along the rare wooden stairs. He saw several maids standing at the stairs. These maids were real maids. Their dress was obviously different from Angela's. They were wearing maids' clothes. Their hands were crossed and hanging under their abdomen. They bowed their heads and were silent like white stone sculptures. Dean walked up the stairs. The nearest maid immediately reached out and stopped him. Her expression was indifferent. "Who are you? What is this?" "I'm the new chef. This is the pastry for the second miss." Dean was slightly cautious. The maid looked at him and thought that he should not have the courage to lie. She slightly nodded and said, "Follow me." She turned and led the way. Soon, the two came to the front of the 6th room. The maid gently knocked on the door and whispered, "Second miss, the pastry you ordered is here." Her voice became soft and very pleasant to listen to. It was completely different from the previous cold tone when she spoke to Dean. Standing outside the door, Dean could faintly hear strange moans coming from inside. He could perceive the situation in the room, and his eyes flashed a trace of strangeness. When the maid turned back, he returned to his reserved appearance. "Come in." An elegant voice came from the room. The maid heaved a sigh of relief and pushed the door open. The first thing Dean saw was the bright red, fluffy carpet. After entering the door, he saw that it was a very spacious room. There was a big bed in the big room for 5 meters wide. There was a lifelike oil painting hanging on the wall behind the bed. The painting was of a very beautiful woman, dignified and elegant. But at the moment, under the painting, there was a strange scene. 2 strong young men, naked, were tied to the bed. In front of them, there was a girl wearing a black silk skirt, holding a bumpy black whip in her hand. There was an arrogant smile on her face. She stepped on the back of one of the young men and looked down at them. She was like a queen on the battlefield, but the whole bed was full of obscene atmosphere. The maid seemed to have long been accustomed to this scene. She looked down at her feet and respectfully said, "Second miss, your pastry is here." The girl turned her head and glanced at him. When she saw Dean's appearance, she was slightly startled, and her eyes lit up. She turned around with interest, slightly raised her head, and arrogantly said, "You come here." Dean sighed in his heart, but still walked over. "You look good, but unfortunately, you are a civilian." The girl looked at Dean and raised the corner of her mouth. "Take off your clothes and let me see." Dean was slightly stunned. He didn't expect the other party to be so direct. He quickly said, "Second miss, I just applied to be a chef. I specially brought you pastries. I hope you can taste it and see if it is to your taste." The girl frowned. "Are you a chef?" Dean nodded quickly. "Humph." The girl coldly snorted, and her face turned cold. "You don't know what is good for you." Dean was speechless. He suddenly felt that this family was a bit sick. Whether it was the young master named Leo in the woods, the girl in front of him, or the housekeeper he met before, they all gave him a strange, sick feeling. However, thinking of the scene in the underground of the family, he could more or less understand. "You go out first," the girl said to the maid. The maid respectfully retreated and closed the door. The room suddenly became quiet. Only the strange sounds of the two young men who were tied up from time to time made Dean's scalp tingle. I'll give you another chance. Take off your clothes. The girl condescendingly arrogant. Dean felt a headache. He thought for a moment, put the pastries in his hand on the table, took a few steps forward, and softly said, "Miss, should I take off my clothes like this?" Then he untied the belt. The girl's impatient look was slightly restrained. There seemed to be some hesitation, but soon she proudly said, "Hurry up. Is it like this?" Dean's movements were very slow, and his voice became erratic. There was a trace of trance in the girl's eyes, but she still maintained an impatient tone and said, "Yes." "Is it really like this?" Dean's fingers were still moving slowly, but if someone were to see it, they would find that Dean's fingers were not moving the belt, but his fingers were moving, bringing a series of afterimages. When both hands moved at the same time, there seemed to be countless finger afterimages, dazzling the eyes of the onlookers. There was a trace of confusion in the girl's eyes, and she said, "Is it like this?" "Miss, look carefully. Is it really like this?" Dean slowly approached, and the afterimages between his fingers were getting more and more numerous. He slowly raised his fingers and approached the girl's eyes. The girl stared blankly, as if she was sluggish. Dean whispered, "Miss, you are sleepy." The girl instinctively yawned, and her eyelids drooped. "You need to rest," Dean continued. The sleepiness on the girl's face was thicker, and her body slightly swayed, as if she would fall at any time. "Miss," one of the young men who was tied felt strange. He turned his head and suddenly saw the countless afterimages between Dean's fingers. He could not help but be stunned. Dean ignored him, still looking at the girl, and softly said, "You need to rest now, so I won't disturb you. Go to sleep, sleep in peace." The girl slowly closed her eyes, and her mouth mumbled some vague words. Her body swayed, and she fell straight down. Dean grabbed her with his palm and slowly put her down. Then, like lightning, he knocked out the other young man. The young man who saw the afterimages of Dean's fingers widened his eyes, and his face was full of horror. He looked at Dean incredulously. Dean slowly approached and rotated his fingers. "You are very tired. You need a rest." The young man looked at him in horror and wanted to shout, but as soon as he opened his mouth, it was pinched by Dean. At the same time, he felt the back of his head was hit hard, and his brain suddenly became chaotic and confused. At this time, the fingers that emerged in his sight were like beams of light, and he was in a trance. "Forget all this. You need to rest." Dean's voice was like a dream, ringing in the young man's ear. The young man's eyelids slowly drooped. After a moment, Dean hypnotized the young man to sleep, picked up the pastries, ate them with a fork, and turned to leave the room. It's really troublesome." Dean closed the door, sighed, and felt a trace of helplessness. He shook his head, turned, and walked along the corridor, passing by the previous maid. The latter glanced at him, but did not say anything. Dean went back to the kitchen, and the three men were surprised to see that Dean's hands were empty. They could not help but ask, "Where's the pastries? Did you give them to the second miss?" Dean nodded slightly. "She ate them?" "Yes, she said they tasted good." The three men seemed to be choked by something. After a while, they reacted and quickly surrounded him to congratulate him. Dean smiled and casually said a few words. He went into the kitchen and saw Angela still lying as before. He stepped forward and touched her gently. Soon, Angela woke up and opened her confused eyes. When she saw Dean clearly, she suddenly sat up. As soon as she sat up, she saw her messy clothes, and her cheeks could not help but blush. She felt a little shy, but soon she woke up and turned to stare at Dean. "How did I fall asleep?" Dean smiled and ambiguously said, "It's probably because your body is too poor." Angela almost laughed. Her body was weak? She was a pioneer and a master among the pioneers. How could a civilian say her body was weak? She looked at Dean suspiciously and suddenly stretched out her hand. Her nails protruded like sharp knives, and with a murderous look, she suddenly grabbed Dean's face. Dean was stunned for a moment and did not seem to react at all. When her nails touched Dean's cheek, Angela instantly withdrew her hand and frowned at Dean. A trace of blood emerged from Dean's cheek. He reached out and touched it. When he saw the blood on his fingers, his eyes widened and looked at Angela in horror. He stepped back but accidentally fell and sat on the ground. Seeing Dean's embarrassed appearance, the last doubt in Angela's heart was dispelled. A master who could make her unconscious without her knowing was at least a dominator. How could he be so embarrassed? She could feel that Dean did not react at all. Even the pores of his body did not shrink. If he was really a master, he would feel her murderous look. Even if he desperately endured, his body instinct would change accordingly. But Dean did not, which could only mean that his fighting instinct was too weak, and he was just an ordinary person. Is it really because I'm too tired recently? Angela frowned slightly and felt strange. Suddenly, she felt that it was necessary to find a doctor to see if there was something wrong with her body or if she had some disease. Thinking of this, she was no longer in the mood to be intimate with Dean. She quickly stood up and quickly tidied up her clothes. Her technique was incomparably skillful. Soon, she returned to her previous dignified appearance and quickly walked away. After watching Angela leave, Dean was relieved in his heart. He gasped for breath and looked like he was still in shock. The three people outside the door saw Dean's embarrassed appearance and secretly gloated in their hearts. Thus, Dean's employment was smoothly stabilized. In the evening, he worked with the other 3 chefs to prepare dinner for the Earl, his 3 sons, 5 daughters, and of course, his 7 wives in the castle. It was not his business to serve the dishes. For these nobles, a chef was also a pariah profession and did not deserve a seat. This kind of chef often had a better name, gourmet. After cooking for the Bourne family, Dean and the 3 chefs were busy cooking for several other big shots. These were the guardians of the Bourne family, including the ruler that Dean had sensed and the 10 pioneers. While cooking, Dean also learned the names of these pioneers and the ruler. At the same time, he also learned that the person who played chess with the ruler and hid his body heat deeply had an extraordinary identity. His status was equal to or even higher than the ruler. He was qualified to sit in the chair and eat with the Bourne family. The 3 chefs called him Mr. Black Mage. When the dinner was finished, Dean's work for the day was basically over. The 3 chefs were temporarily responsible for helping Dean familiarize himself with the kitchen and the taste of the Bourne family's young masters and ladies under the butler's order. Late at night, Dean returned to the assigned residence and slept in the same big room with the 3 chefs. Not long after, the 3 chefs fell asleep and snored. Dean leaned on the pillow and looked at the moonlight shining in through the window. A touch of gold flashed in his eyes as he scanned the whole castle. He saw that the Bourne family's master had fallen asleep. The second miss, whom he had hypnotized, did not show any abnormalities during dinner. The hypnosis effect was very successful. At this moment, she was in her room and playing the sick game in the afternoon. In addition, Dean also saw a son of the Bourne family sneak into the room of one of his wives and do something unethical. This family is really hopeless. Dean felt that everything here was very desolate. He knew that the ruler and the 10 pioneers were most likely aware of the young master's bad behavior, but they did not inform the Bourne family's master. The Bourne family's master was called Barrett Bourne. He was just an ordinary civilian, but his body heat was slightly higher than ordinary people. It seemed that he had taken some special medicine to enhance his physique. It seems that the Overlord Guardian isn't completely loyal to this patriarch. Dean's eyes flashed. Under his penetrating vision, the whole Bourne family was in his eyes. In just one night, he discovered this huge secret. From this point, he could feel the intricate relationship within the family. He was not in the mood to understand this relationship in depth, but he felt that the twisted young master might be able to make use of it. Chapter 1023. The underground of the castle was a 3-story basement. Such an underground structure was not uncommon in other aristocratic castles. Most aristocrats liked to build cellars to store some high-quality wine and books, as well as their own wealth of gold and jewels. However, in this underground structure of the Bourne family, there was none of these things. There were only instruments and people. A variety of instruments were placed in each basement floor. Some of them were more like torture tools. There There were 8 rooms in each basement floor. The rooms were either filled with torture tools or imprisoned people. Most of them were in their 20s. Their bodies were strong and healthy, and this was the time when their vitality was at its peak. The person who was called the Black Mage was an old man in his 60s. He wore a black hood, and his hair was neat and beautiful. His silver and black hair intertwined, and his face was deep. Although he was old, one could still see that he was extremely handsome when he was young. At this moment, he followed the spiral staircase to the basement. The people stationed there were all wearing black robes like ghosts. Seeing the Black Mage arrive, the guards lowered their heads and saluted. The Black Mage went straight to the second basement floor and stopped in front of the 4th room in the middle. He pushed open the door, and inside was a laboratory. At this moment, a voluptuous woman was lying on a metal bed in the laboratory. Her hands and feet were shackled to the side of the bed, and she was in a semi-conscious state. Hearing the noise, the woman slowly opened her eyes. When she saw the Black Mage, her face immediately revealed a sinister and venomous expression. The Black Mage was not frightened by the malevolent gaze on her face. Instead, he smiled and said, "Not bad. It seems that you have adapted. Blindly struggling will only hurt yourself. Very good." The voluptuous woman glared at him and gritted her teeth. "You scum. One day, the temple will arrest you and burn you with holy fire." The Black Mage lifted his hood, and his silver-gray hair fell down. Under the dim yellow light, his body was straight. Just looking at his back, he looked like an imposing holy knight. However, there were already wrinkles on his face. The corrosion of time could not be resisted. He smiled, and his gaze moved from the woman's face along her neck to her chest. This was definitely not a place that men would be impulsive at. It was a scene that would instantly make them shrink back. The woman's neck and collarbone were still snow white, but the skin stopped here. The lower half had been cut open, the flesh and blood clearly visible inside, as if she had been skinned alive. Meanwhile, a bit below this flesh and blood tissue, at the level of the heart, several clavicles that were like the claws of skeleton opened up, within them a lump of slightly wriggling dark red tissue, as well as a bright red beating heart. The dark wizard's eyes sparkled, as if he was admiring a perfect piece of art. There was a hint of fanaticism and intoxication in his eyes. Although he could see very clearly with his vision, he could not help but lean forward at that moment, as if he wanted to see every single blood vessel in detail. Seeing his expression, the woman felt nauseous. She looked at him with disgust. "You betrayed Lordborn. You will be executed sooner or later." When the dark wizard heard her words, he tilted his head slightly and glanced at her. He chuckled and said, "If I have to be judged, then only God can judge me. Unfortunately, there is no God in this world. Those fellows in the temple only know how to play tricks. Besides, the shady business they do is not much better than mine. The only difference is that they are powerful, so it is legal. However, I did not obey their rules, so I am not legal." The woman spat. "A villain like you deserves to die without a burial ground." The Black Mage smiled and turned to leave. He waved his hand and said, "Since you want me to die so much, then live well. Otherwise, how will you see that day?" As soon as he finished speaking, he went out of the door and closed the door behind him. After leaving the room, the Black Mage went to a laboratory on the 3rd floor. This laboratory was soaked with all kinds of tissues and organs that had been cut off. There was a baby's head, a woman's broken hand, and the eyes and claws of beasts. There was also a heart and stomach that was soaked red. It was hard to tell whether it was a human or a monster. The Black Mage took off his coat and hung it at the side. He changed into the laboratory work clothes and took out a small glass test tube from the freezer. There was a parasitic soul worm frozen inside. He took it to the workbench and turned on the table lamp. Then he picked up the parasitic soul worm with tweezers and cut it with a knife. Then he put it in front of the instrument to observe. Seeing this instrument, Dean's eyes flashed. It was a microscope. The structure was roughly the same as that of the old era, but from the material, it was obviously made in the later era. There were obvious traces of splicing. It's effortless to get it. The corner of Dean's mouth raised slightly, but he did not act immediately. He was going to observe again to see if there was any power behind the Bourne family. The night passed. The black mage fiddled with all kinds of organs in the laboratory. Dean also observed all night. The next morning, the black mage felt tired. He got up and left the basement, returning to the castle to rest. Dean also took the opportunity to close his eyes. Less than an hour later, the dawn shone into the castle. Dean sat up with a sleepy face and yawned. At this time, the other three also got up one by one and washed up. After washing up, Dean followed the three to the kitchen. At this time, the vegetable vendors in the market had already sent the vegetables they had ordered to the castle. They went to receive it and then used a carriage specially equipped in the kitchen to transport several big bags of vegetables back to the kitchen. Next, they divided the work, washed the vegetables, cut the vegetables, made pastries, and so on. Breakfast was easy to make. It was milk and vegetables. This was Burritborn's. It had a light taste. Milk and bacon. This was Burrit's sons. Milk and snacks. This was the ladies. As for the other 10 pioneers and rulers, they all had milk and steak. They ate high-calorie food early in the morning. After making breakfast, the few of them prepared lunch in advance. They only needed to wait until it was time to prepare. During this period, they could take out an hour to rest. The three people huddled in the corner of the kitchen and chatted, or sat in a daze and yawned. Dean leaned on the chair alone, closed his eyes, and slept. The 3 meals of the day were soon over. In the evening, when Dean was ready to go back to rest, he met Angela again. She came to find Dean. As one of the 10 pioneers in the castle, her status was only slightly lower than the butler. The butler's strength was not strong, just an ordinary person. But in this world, power was often more important than strength. No matter how strong a person was, without background, he was just a high-level thug. As for rebellion, there would always be other masters who willingly surrendered or were forced to surrender to come out and suppress them. You come with me. Angela stopped Dean and the other 3 people on the way back to the dormitory. She pointed at Dean, who was walking in front of her, and said expressionlessly. Dean frowned slightly and nodded. When he followed Angela not far away, he suddenly heard the envious discussion of the 3 people behind him. This kid is really lucky with women. It seems that Angela is addicted to him. It seems that this kid is going to be squeezed dry. Dean looked at Angela in front of him. She should also be able to hear such voices, but she did not respond. It seemed that this woman did not have much taboo in this aspect. Dean sighed softly in his heart. He walked to a lawn and stopped, asking, Miss Angela, where are you taking me? Go to my room and sit. I have something to talk to you about. Angela stopped, but her face was no longer cold, but with a hint of charm. Dean smiled bitterly. Miss Angela, those 3 seniors are strong. Why don't you go to them? Angela's face was slightly cold. What kind of person do you think I am? Do you think I will like any kind of goods? Just based on those 3 pigs? They're as ugly as a pile of shit. Bah, they're not even qualified to carry my shoes. Dean could not help but want to roll his eyes. Whether you like them or not depends on their appearance. Hurry up, don't waste my time. It's getting late, Angela urged. Dean's heart moved. He quickly agreed and quickly followed them. Angela turned her head and walked away. Unexpectedly, as soon as she turned her head, she heard a cry of pain behind her. She looked back and saw that Dean had fallen to the ground. How could you be so careless? Angela quickly stepped forward to support him. Dean looked up. A bloodstain appeared on his cheek, and blood was flowing. Angela was shocked. What happened to you? She glanced at the place where Dean fell. There was a small stone stained with blood. Obviously, Dean's face was scratched on it. Dean's facial features wrinkled in pain, and he cried out in pain, It hurts! It hurts! It had to be said that no matter how good-looking a face was, as long as one was willing to put in effort, one would certainly make an ugly posture. At this moment, Dean's facial features wrinkled. His lips turned up, his eyes rolled up, and his cheeks were distorted. He looked very ugly. Angela suddenly lost interest. She didn't expect that a small scratch would make Dean show such a distressed posture. For her, injuries were nothing but a common occurrence. But looking at Dean's appearance, it was clear that he was a real pretty boy. He had a handsome face, but a little injury would kill him. Although she could negate all shortcomings by virtue of his good looks, but at the moment, Dean was not good-looking and weak. She was disappointed. She loosened her original hand and frowned. "Don't shout. Go and see Mr. Rand. Or go back and clean your wound and bandage it. It's not a big injury. You won't die." Dean covered his injured face. His nose was full of pain. He endured the pain and said, But, I have to go to your place." "You don't need to go." Angela didn't wait for him to finish and said impatiently. Dean was stunned. He even forgot the pain on his face. Seeing his stunned eyes, Angela felt even more annoyed. She turned and walked away, too lazy to pay attention to him. As she walked, she suddenly thought, how could there be such a coincidence? She had just said that the other three were ugly, but Dean's face was cut. Was it intentional? Thinking of this, she couldn't help but turn her head to look. She saw Dean covering his face, his shoulders were shaking, and he was making low, choking, sobbing sounds. Unexpectedly, he was crying. She shook her head, turned, and walked away quickly. While the night was still early, she had to find some other fun. Dean didn't go to Rand. He covered his face and returned to the dormitory. While covering his face, he kept gently scratching the wound with his fingers to prevent the wound from healing. In fact, the wound was not caused by his bump. With the quality of the stone, even if it rubbed against his face, it might not be able to cut a wound. When he fell, he used his nails to scratch his cheek, and then his face fell on the stone, which made it look like a bump. He found that after experiencing Crimson Moon's experiment, his body's self-healing ability had improved by several levels. First of all, his legs and hands, as well as the scars left in the prison, had all healed. His broken leg had also recovered. The previous dark scars had faded away, and there was new skin inside. Not a single scar could be seen on his body. Even a magic mark on his chest had disappeared. Unfortunately, this amazing healing ability didn't work on his chest. His heart was still incomplete. However, after these days of observation, Dean found that the formed heart seemed to be a little bit stronger. It seemed that it would grow. This ignited a glimmer of hope in Dean's heart. Perhaps this heart would continue to grow until it fully adapted to his body and become a new heart in his body. Seeing Dean come back with his face covered in blood, the three people in the dormitory were all shocked. They quickly came up to ask about the situation. Dean only said that he was hurt by a stone. Although the three of them were jealous of Dean, they quickly poured water for Dean and helped him clean the wound. This made Dean look at them in a different light. The three of them dug out the first aid hemostatic medicine from the dormitory and applied it to Dean. After giving him a few words, they returned to their respective beds. At night, the three of them quickly fell asleep. Dean cheered up and used his X-ray vision to see everything in the castle. Soon, he saw that the young master who climbed into the room of his father's concubine from the window last night had climbed into the room of another young girl from the window tonight. This was Barrett's eldest daughter, who seemed to have the same father and mother as the young master. Dean looked at him with emotion. The young master was really energetic. In addition to the young master's indecent behavior, Dean's attention was mainly focused on the Black Mage. Through the day's observation, he found that the Black Mage was the key figure in the castle. Moreover, he was not a guard or knight hired by Barrett, but similar to a guest. But from the performance of the Black Mage, it was obvious that he was not simply a guest in the castle. Chapter 1024. The Black Mage was immersed in all kinds of books in the study. Dean also used his X-ray vision to look at all kinds of books, but he could only see the reverse side or the side, which made it very difficult to distinguish. But this inadvertently made Dean more proficient in the X-ray vision ability. He was able to penetrate through the pages. The night deepened. The Black Mage seemed to be a little tired. He took out his pocket watch and looked at the time. It was getting late, so he immediately closed the book, got up, and left the study. At the moment, the young masters and ladies in the castle were asleep. Count Barrett was also asleep. The Black Mage went down the secret staircase to the Underground Research Institute. He selected a few instruments from the 6th room on the 1st floor and went to the 4th room on the 2nd floor. The plump woman whose chest had been replaced by strange tissue was lying there. Her neck and arms had blue and black veins could be seen. The strange tissue on her chest was gradually encroaching on her body. The black mage looked at her and was very satisfied. He turned to the side and took out anesthetic and other things to inject into the sleeping plump woman. The moment the injection happened, the voluptuous woman woke up in shock. She opened her eyes and saw the dark mage, as well as the anesthetic in his hands. Instantly, her face turned ugly and a little hopeless. She gritted her teeth and said, "You sinner, the glory of the Burn King will punish you." The black mage chuckled. "Unfortunately, he has been dead for more than 200 years. Otherwise, I would really like to use his body for research. I heard that the first batch of kings took the road of evolution outside of magic marks. All of them were fighting geniuses. Unlike today's nobles, they are just a group of pigs who only know how to eat and drink. At least pigs can be slaughtered and eaten. The thing I regret the most is that I persuaded him to accept you." The plump woman gritted her teeth. The black mage smiled. "I left the most precious thing to you because of the kindness of the past. Otherwise, you would have been thrown into the mass grave like garbage and disposed of like those experimental subjects." The plump woman wanted to say something, but felt her tongue was numb. The anger in her eyes suddenly turned into fear. She knew that the anesthetic effect had played a role. Once the whole body was anesthetized, she could only be at the mercy of the devil in front of her. The black mage noticed her strangeness and laughed. "Be a good girl and sleep. So many years have passed. Why struggle? You should have accepted your fate long ago." The voluptuous woman bit her lower lip. The pain stimulated her senses, but her brain still felt dizzy and sleepy. She couldn't stop it. This environment isn't bad. Right at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded. The sudden voice caused the two of them to jump in fright. The black magician and the voluptuous woman turned their heads at the same time and saw a young man dressed in linen clothes appear in the laboratory. Although he was dressed in ordinary linen clothes, they could still feel the young man's tall and straight temperament. His disdainful gaze made it seem as if his every movement was dignified. The plump woman was in a daze. Judging from Dean's attire, it was obvious that he was not a black mage's subordinate. But how could a villager suddenly appear here, and so suddenly? The moment the black mage saw Dean, his pupils slightly shrank. He quickly took 2 steps back. His muscles tightened and his bones moved. He slowly adjusted his posture and coldly stared at Dean. "Who are you?" Dean indifferently said. "Don't you remember me after eating my food?" The black wizard was startled and suddenly said in shock, "You're the newly recruited chef? Who the hell are you? What's your purpose in coming here?" He shouted, but his heart was a little nervous. Was his whereabouts exposed? The young man in front of him had a tall and straight temperament. He had a dignified and masculine aura and could quietly appear here. His strength was extraordinary. Most likely, he was the law enforcer of the temple. Dean felt the old man's vague, trembling, and tension in front of him. He smiled and said, "These are the questions I should ask you. You have done so many things behind Barit's back. You should know about it. You have betrayed him and done these forbidden experiments here. Tell me, who is behind you?" He had wanted to continue observing for a few more days to familiarize himself with the Bourne family and this mysterious dark mage, but he realized that there was no meaning in continuing to observe. He had more or less found out what he needed to know. As for the rest that he didn't know, he would need to spend several times more time to find out from the clues. Interrogation was the most direct and convenient method. The black mage's face slightly changed. Dean's words seemed to be a tacit agreement. He knew that he couldn't give up today. His mind was spinning rapidly, thinking of a way to escape. Although he was not afraid of Dean in front of him, but if the other side sneaked into the Bourne family to capture him, it meant that his whereabouts had long been exposed. Most likely, there were other law enforcers outside. These damn beasts, he secretly cursed in his heart. His eyes turned and deliberately said with a fierce face, "Less nonsense, smelly boy. You dare to break in here alone. You are dead." Dean indifferently smiled. It seems that it is necessary to make you obedient." The black mage sneered. Just as he was about to open his mouth, his pupils suddenly shrank. He only felt a sense of danger like a viper climbing up his back. His whole body was numb, and his hair stood up. He hurriedly retreated, but it was still too late. In front of him, Dean suddenly magnified several times. "Huh." He felt a buzzing sound in his head. His cheeks were burning, and there was incomparable pain. His neck was somewhat sprained. The black mage was startled, but quickly reacted. He suddenly growled, and his whole body was covered with black mist. His body was transformed into a devil. "Ha!" There was another crisp sound. The dispersed mist stopped abruptly, as if it was dispersed by a slap. The black mage's cheeks twisted to the other side. There was a bright red palm print on both sides of his face, and the hood on his head was slapped off. "Obedient." Dean quietly looked at him and asked. The black mage's brain was somewhat confused. After a while, his scattered thoughts gathered again. Looking at Dean, who was close at hand, his pupils shrank. "You! Who the hell are you?" "If you are not obedient, I am the Grim Reaper who takes you away. If you are obedient, I am your king." Dean's voice was very calm, as if he was telling a very ordinary thing. The black mage was startled for a moment, and suddenly said, "You are not the temple's law enforcer?" "Ha!" A crisp sound. The black mage's face tilted to the side. After 2 seconds, he reacted. Anger rose in his eyes, and he angrily stared at Dean. But when his eyes met Dean's calm black eyes, the anger suddenly subsided. He just gritted his teeth and said, "If you like to humiliate me, then come at me. I'm not interested in humiliating an old man." Dean indifferently said, "It is not your turn to ask questions, so don't blindly ask questions, so as to avoid looking for trouble for yourself." The black mage gritted his teeth, swallowed his anger, and did not speak. "Ha!" Another crisp sound. The black mage's mouth overflowed with blood, and his eyes almost spurted out fire. "What the hell do you want? I didn't ask you to be silent. I asked you to answer my question. I don't want to repeat it a second time." Dean indifferently said. The black mage trembled in anger as he thought of Dean's original words. He had been humble in his life, but that was when he was in his 20s. It was because of those humble experiences that he wanted to become strong, thirsted for strength, and thus embarked on this road. Since he set foot on this road, he had not been humiliated. He had long been accustomed to the superiority of controlling other people's lives. He did not expect that today it would be like being beaten back to its original form. This was pure humiliation and crushing. Compared to the temple's law enforcer who forced him to hide from place to place, his anger was stronger. After taking a few deep breaths, the dark wizard slowly suppressed the anger in his heart and said in a low voice, "Barit knows about all these experiments. I didn't hide it from him. Everything I did was legal, and I received his permission. I was only hired by him. These things can't be made by you alone. Where did you buy them? Do you often meet with your peers?" Dean asked. The black mage whispered, "I bought these instruments from a black shop. I studied them alone. I don't look like people from the Institute of Magic." Dean nodded slightly, turned around, and walked in front of the plump woman. The effect of the anesthetic was so strong that it spread to her whole body. Her eyelids drooped, her head could not move, and she could not even speak. At this moment, her eyes were repeatedly rolling, as if she was struggling, but also as if she wanted to convey some information to Dean. Dean saw that she wanted to speak. He knew that she wanted to reveal a lot about the black mage, but he was not in a hurry. He looked at the black mage. "Is there any antidote for anesthesia? Give it to her. I think she should know a lot about you. After all, you are old friends, right?" The black mage's face slightly changed, but he reluctantly smiled. "There is no antidote for anesthesia here. The effect of anesthesia is too short." Dean didn't force the black mage. After all, he didn't know about the drugs. Blind intimidation would reduce the effect of intimidation. He immediately ordered, "Let's go to the 3rd floor." Then he turned and walked in front. He took the lead to open the door of the laboratory. The black mage looked at Dean's back in front of him. His eyes flashed, and a black mist slowly emerged from his body. The moment Dean opened the door, he suddenly accelerated and dashed toward Dean's back like a black phantom. Whoosh! The silver light flashed as a sharp blade pierced out. Puff! The silver light turned into an arc and bounced back into a full moon. A long black blade tail rose up like a viper. The tip of the tail was glowing with cold light. It was slightly swaying like a viper. It seemed that it had eyes that were looking at the black mage. The black mage's face was covered with scales. He was forced to take action halfway through his demonization. He was worried that Dean would notice him in advance. His arms had been demonized, but at this moment, one of his arms had disappeared along with his sleeves. On the ground behind his feet, there was a demonized arm. It was covered with black scales. The fingernails were extremely long, like sharp daggers. "Do you have a grudge against me or against your own hand?" Dean's indifferent voice came. His words almost made the black mage faint. He covered his broken arm. The pain was too much for him to make a sound. He was angry, but more frightened. Previously, when he was controlled by Dean, he felt that it was because he didn't enter the demonic body. But at this moment, in the case of the demonic body, his strength had doubled, and his vision had become much stronger. Because of this, he was able to see the gap between his strength and Dean's. The sharp tail blade appeared almost instantaneously. The speed of the demonization was incredible. It must be known that the power of the magic mark stimulated the cell tissue to mutate. There was a process, and it would take at least a few seconds. But this terrifying tail blade appeared in an instant, not even a second. What kind of demonization speed was this? Feeling the tail blade getting closer, the black mage hurriedly replied, I didn't mean it. I have a grudge against my own hand." He felt a little embarrassed when he said this, "But I did it on purpose." Dean slightly tilted his head and glanced at the black mage. "Which part of your body do you have a grudge against? Tell me at once, and I'll avenge you." Feeling the cold air emitted from the tail blade, the black mage's face turned blue. He dryly said, No more. Is it really gone?" "Really no more." The tail blade behind Dean's spine quickly retracted. The speed was so fast that the black mage didn't see it clearly. But when the tail blade was completely retracted, he saw that Dean's pants were intact. The tail blade was sticking out from the gap of the pants. His eyes widened. In the moment of his sneak attack, he actually had time to let the tail blade go around the upper edge of the pants. What kind of calmness was this? He felt that he could roughly estimate Dean's strength. It was at least abyss level. Thinking of this, his heart was like dead ashes. He silently followed behind Dean and didn't wait for an opportunity to sneak attack. He felt depressed and stupid. Since Dean dared to leave his back to him, he naturally had taken precautions and deliberately waited for him to attack. Sure enough, after doing experiments for a long time, his combat experience was as stupid as a pig's. The black mage sighed in his heart. He used his robe to wrap the wound on his broken arm. Soon the bleeding stopped, but the pain was still spreading. Fortunately, it was within the range that he could endure. The spirit guards distributed on the second underground floor were a little stunned when they saw Dean swaggering out. They didn't see anyone pass by, but looking at Dean's appearance and dress, it was clear that he wasn't a prisoner here. However, when they saw the black mage following behind Dean, the spirit guards didn't step forward to intercept him. They tactfully turned a blind eye to him. Seeing that the spirit guard around him didn't move, the black mage was so angry that he almost vomited blood. The enemy sneaked in and you didn't see him, but now he was swaggering in front of you, and you still acted like you didn't see him? Are you all blind? Secretly angry, the black mage thought that if there was a chance, he must replace this group of trash. At this time, Dean had already led the way to the third underground floor. The spirit guards here saw Dean and the black mage together, but they didn't move. Dean came to the front of a laboratory. The door was locked. He slightly leaned to the side and glanced at the black mage. Chapter 1025. There were all kinds of experimental equipment in the laboratory, such as gauges, flasks, titration tubes, scales, glimmering hourglasses, and so on. Of course, there was also the microscope that Dean cared about the most. Did you buy all of these from a black shop? Dean asked. The black sorcerer nodded. Dean picked up a few experimental instruments that he couldn't recognize and asked the black sorcerer about their uses. The black sorcerer answered them one by one in a low voice. His face regained his confidence. In this field of experiments, he was a professional. Moreover, as a black sorcerer who studied the art of life, he had a sense of superiority in his bones like other people in the same field. Even in the face of the strong abyss, his heart was filled with disdain. Dean turned around and found that the instruments in the laboratory were used for biological and chemical research. He was very satisfied because it saved him a lot of time. He immediately came to the microscope, took out a drop of his blood as a sample, and carefully observed it under the microscope. The black sorcerer looked at Dean, who was concentrating on looking at the microscope. His eyes flashed slightly, and there was a hint of killing intent in his eyes. But when his eyes swept to the end of Dean's spine, a trace of fear flashed in his eyes. He didn't know whether Dean was testing him again, but he estimated that this was not the best time to assassinate him, because soon Dean would be shocked by this great magic tool and exclaim. He was waiting. However, after waiting for a moment, Dean seemed to be asleep, motionless, still concentrating on looking at the microscope. He frowned slightly, and there was some entanglement in his heart. He felt that he couldn't figure out Dean's thoughts. 10 minutes later, Dean slowly raised his head. His expression was uncertain. Sometimes he was shocked, and sometimes he was confused. If it wasn't for the previous repeated confirmation, he would really suspect that he was mistaken. The general composition of blood mainly consisted of blood cells and plasma. But in his blood, in addition to these two basic substances, there was also a type of tiny cell. It was light black, and the cell was not round. Instead, it was bullet-shaped and extremely sharp. As it flowed, it pierced into the blood cells and fused with them, just like the fusion of sperm and eggs. After accepting the light black cone-shaped cell, the color of the blood cell became darker, and a black outline could be seen inside, as if it was breeding something. The color of the blood cell also changed, and sharp black thorns slowly grew on the surface, like a sea urchin. One after another, the blood cells were penetrated by the cone cells and fused with each other like a virus. The speed was medium. Dean could not help but think of his body. At this moment, the blood in his body was fusing with the black cones. His body was constantly undergoing changes that were difficult to be seen by the naked eye. This feeling made his scalp go numb, and his heart was filled with panic. No matter who it was, when they felt that they were changing uncontrollably, they would be afraid that they would lose themselves. However, these black cones were only the mysterious third substance that made up his blood. He found that the composition of his blood was also very different from that of a normal human. His blood contained a small amount of plasma protein, but a large amount of hydrochloric acid. In other words, the substance could not be called hydrochloric acid. Salts and acids were only the main components of it. In addition, there were other substances that he could not identify. All of these combined made the hydrochloric acid in the plasma extremely corrosive, even more terrifying than sulfuric acid. However, the amazing thing was that the hydrochloric acid in the blood did not corrode the glass he used to extract the blood. Rather than saying it was corrosive, it was more accurate to say that it was engulfing. This characteristic had no effect on inanimate objects, but to other life forms, it was a fatal poison. Is this the after effect of the Crimson Moon experiments? Could it be the desolate god's substance? Dean's eyes flashed. After thinking for a moment, he turned to look at the black mage beside him. Call on one of your guards. The black mage was slightly startled. He did not know what Dean's intention was, but he still left the laboratory and summoned a guard near the cloister. The guard, wearing a black robe, entered the laboratory. He lifted the hood of his head, revealing a snow-white face. It turned out to be an extremely beautiful woman wearing crystal pendant earrings. She had an elegant temperament. She quickly glanced at the scene in the laboratory and was somewhat puzzled. She bowed her head and said to the black mage, "Sir, what can I do for you?" The black mage looked at Dean. Dean got up from the chair in front of the microscope and slowly walked in front of the snow-white beautiful woman. He said, "Raise your hand." The woman was slightly surprised. She looked at the black mage next to her. The latter nodded slightly, indicating that he would obey. The woman did not dare to ask more. She raised her slender hand. There was a string of shiny bracelets hanging on her snow-white wrist. Dean's face was indifferent. He reached out to hold her hand. When the woman blushed, his finger moved. Ah! The woman let out a soft cry. She saw that Dean's palm had retracted. There was a bloodstain on her palm. She looked up blankly at the tall and handsome Dean in front of her. Her face showed a look of grievance. Dean raised his hand as if he did not hear anything. He raised his other hand. The nails on his other hand rose by several inches. He gently cut a wound on his finger and squeezed it hard. Soon, a few drops of blood fell along the wound and fell on the woman's palm. Dean put the cut finger in his mouth and sucked it slightly. When he took it out again, the wound on his finger had healed. At this time, the woman suddenly screamed in pain. Her body bent down, and she took 2 steps back. White smoke rose from the wound on her palm. She wanted to withdraw her hand and knead it, but Dean quickly grabbed her wrist and brought it to his face. He carefully stared at it. The woman felt the burning pain in her palm. She was terrified. She knew that the black mage was doing experiments all year round. Although Dean was wearing linen clothes, his temperament was extraordinary. Naturally, she would not treat him as an ordinary person. Moreover, from the performance of the black mage, it was likely that he was in the same profession. They were experimenting on her. Thinking of the terrible experiments of the black mage, she could not help but struggle violently. She wanted to withdraw her hand. Dean slightly frowned and raised his hand. Puff! The woman's hand was broken from the elbow. The cut surface of the wound was smooth. The woman fell back. Seeing the beautiful broken hand held by Dean, she suddenly screamed. Dean turned back to the microscope. He adjusted the distance of the microscope. Then he put the woman's broken hand under the microscope and observed it from the microscopic world. He was stunned by what he saw. After a moment, he slowly raised his head. There was no shock on his face. Everything was as he thought. The woman's hand only confirmed his speculation. His blood could devour the cells of other creatures. Simply put, for other creatures, his blood was equivalent to sulfuric acid. If he did not cut off the woman's hand and let his blood corrode it, her life would end here. It was only a matter of time. Is this the god's blood made by Crimson Moon? Dean's face changed. Even he felt horrified. Just a drop of blood was enough to be fatal. While he was thinking, the snow-white broken hand beside the microscope quickly rotted and dried up. The surface emitted more white smoke. The festering area expanded from the palm to the whole palm and quickly extended to the wrist. The black mage was dumbfounded. He could roughly guess the reason, but he could not believe it. After a moment, the beautiful broken hand completely rotted. Even the bones became incomparably black. The bones were sticky with black and shiny mucus. It was crooked, like a few black leeches lying on it. The snow-white crystal bracelet hung intact on the wrist bone. It was particularly eye-catching. Dean also noticed this change. He did not expect that in just 10 minutes, a few drops of his blood could burn the arm of a limitless. He saw the pure black and crystal mucus. He took out a pair of tweezers, pried a little of it, and smeared it on a piece of glass. He took it under the microscope to observe. Just as he thought, the black mucus was indeed the black cone-shaped substance in the blood. These cone-shaped cells were like black holes, swallowing all the cells in the woman's severed hand without leaving any residue behind. It was as if all the swallowed cells had been transported to another world. Seeing this, Dean felt goosebumps all over his body. He could not help but look at the few drops of blood he had taken out earlier. The color of the blood was dry and black, just like the black mucus. Could it be that I will eventually be swallowed by this thing? Dean was scared. He took the few drops of blood and continued to observe. Soon, he found that his blood was different from the black mucus on the woman's hand. His blood still maintained the appearance of blood cells, but the red blood cells and platelets in these blood cells had been swallowed. The blood cells were like black sea urchins covered with sharp thorns. They looked like very dangerous viruses. Dean frowned. He cut his palm and observed it under the microscope. Half an hour later, he was relieved. Although the blood in his wound was constantly swallowed and turned into a strange black, sea urchin-like appearance, the mutated blood would still mix with the oxygen in the air and bring vitality to the body. He knew that the blood in his body would mutate sooner or later, but he did not know what he would become after the mutation. Perhaps Crimson Moon also did not know this change. The Black Magician looked at Dean, studying his body. His face was strange, and his narrow eyes flashed with deep fear. He felt that Dean was more like a monster than him. The woman with the broken hand shrank by the door and did not shout. She knew that doing so would only make her die faster. After all, the patience of a superior would never be used on a lowly person like her, unless there was an ulterior motive. After midnight, Dean had a good understanding of his blood. He continued to collect samples from his body, such as his frozen right arm. Now his right arm was no longer frozen and returned to the appearance of a normal person's arm. It seemed that the cold in his arm had been digested, and his arm had regained feeling. Through the microscope, Dean found that there was no difference in the structure of his right arm and his left arm. The frozen right arm that had troubled him for many years was magically solved after Crimson Moon's experiment. Dean tried to find his magic marks to observe, but he could not find any magic marks on his whole body, so he could only give up. A microscope alone is not enough. I can't even detect the mitochondria. It seems that more advanced instruments are needed. Dean sat in front of the microscope. The biggest gain tonight was to understand the changes in his blood, so he was mentally prepared. "Sir, it's almost dawn," the Black Magician whispered. Dean recovered from his thoughts and glanced at him. "Don't sleep today. Accompany me to the Black Shop." The Black Magician was startled and quickly said, "Sir, the Black Shop usually opens at night." "Then accompany me to go shopping," Dean said indifferently. The Black Magician slightly opened his mouth and finally agreed with a wry smile. The woman who shrank by the door could not help but be stunned when she heard the words of the two. She looked at Dean in a daze. She did not expect that the Black Magician, who was like a demon in her mind, would actually call this young man sir. Dean was about to go out and noticed the woman who was in a daze by the door. He slightly frowned and said, "Go and bandage the wound. Don't let it get infected." The woman was stunned. She did not expect Dean to care about her. She was a little touched in her heart. She knew that her hand was cut off by the young man in front of her, but she was still inexplicably touched when she heard his words of concern. But soon, she calmed down and hurriedly promised. Dean opened the door and gestured to the Black Magician. "Go in front." The corner of the Black Magician's mouth twitched slightly. He wanted to secretly signal the woman to send a message when he went out, but now it seemed that it would not work. After walking out of the underground laboratory, Dean did not return to his room. At the moment, the sky was still dark. There was still more than an hour before dawn. He followed the Black Mage to his room and asked him to take out some gold coins. Then he asked about the purchase of equipment in the Black Shop. He found out that it was not gold coins, but the exclusive transaction currency of the Darkness Temple, black gold. Black gold was a special metal that was refined by a special dark wizard. It was circulated in the Black Shop as a currency. It was very hard and more expensive than gold. Black gold can be exchanged with points and magic tools. Gold coins can also be exchanged. The exchange rate of gold coins is 10:1. 10 gold coins can be exchanged for 1 black gold. The See the Mirror that the Elder used just now costs 90,000 black gold. It is equivalent to 900,000 gold coins. It is enough to buy half of the street's property. The Black Magician introduced to Dean. Dean asked, "How much is the Bourne family's property worth?" The Black Magician was surprised. "Do you want to sell all the property of the Burritt family? Answer what I ask. Don't you have a long memory?" Dean frowned. Chapter 1026. Dean glanced at him but didn't say anything. He sat in the study room and looked through the information. He found that the Black Mage had a wide range of knowledge, especially in the field of biological research and the creation of poisons. Neurotoxin, bloodlust, Burgenmosis disease. Dean looked through the drug experiments. Some of them were poisons developed by the Black Mage, and some are famous poisons developed by other people in the same field. He read 10 lines a glance. His super memory allowed him to have a photographic memory. Suddenly, he turned to a book with the words "Witch Blood Technique." It was more like a diary than a book. The handwriting of the Black Mage was recording about the witch blood technique. This was a kind of neurotoxin that could be inherited. Once infected, the offspring would inherit it. After being infected by the witch blood technique, the personality would become bloodthirsty, violent, impulsive, and extremely emotional. Sometimes they would be irritable, and sometimes they would be depressed. According to the records, some of the people who were infected by the witch blood technique became emotional and killed people in the street. They were arrested. Some of them were desperate and committed suicide. Dean looked at the records of the cases. The names were shocking. When he turned to the last page, he saw the name of Burrit-born. Behind this name, there was a string of surname-born. Did you use the witch blood technique on Burrit? Dean's face slightly changed as he looked at the old man. The Black Mage knew that the matter would be exposed when Dean turned to the witch blood technique. He smiled bitterly. I was forced to do it. You know, wizards like us need a lot of money to research things. When I went to Burrit's place, I wanted to use my ability to exchange for the corresponding remuneration. But he relied on his aristocratic status and often defaulted on my salary. In the end, I had no choice but to rely on myself. Dean slightly sneered, but didn't expose him. From the fragmentary words of the transformed woman in the underground laboratory, he knew that the old man was lying. Although Burrit was an aristocratic earl, but the Black Mage was also a master. He was a big shot in the castle. Burrit was stupid enough to default the salary of such a master. From the beginning, he targeted the Bourne family with a purpose. However, this had nothing to do with him. He suddenly thought of the young master named Leo he had seen when he first arrived, and the young master who had sneaked into his husband's concubine's room at night, as well as the second young mistress who liked to play sick games. Obviously, these people had been affected by the witch blood spell that the Black Magician had cast on their families. Their desires had broken free from the shackles and were uncontrollable. In the end, it would only bring about destruction, a destruction that would cause them to have no descendants. What a vicious poison, Dean whispered. The Black Wizard smiled bitterly. I'm just trying to protect myself. I like it. Dean smiled and looked at him. Why don't you put such a good thing in the giant wall? Do you need to worry about being arrested by the temple? The Black Wizard was stunned. He suspected that he had heard wrongly. He said in a daze, Isn't this too dangerous? Are you afraid of danger? The Black Mage saw Dean's serious eyes, and suddenly his heart throbbed. He felt that Dean's idea was not to test him, but such an idea was too crazy, and he had never thought of it. He suddenly felt that he was a bit stupid. Yes, why didn't he put this thing in the whole city? There was a burst of excitement in his heart, but soon this excitement was quickly extinguished. He thought of a great existence. What's wrong? Dean noticed the change in his face and slightly narrowed his eyes. The Black Wizard shook his head. If I put it in a large area, it will inevitably cause the temple to search for me. If it's only the temple, it's fine. But if the movement is too big, it will definitely attract the attention of the Wizard King. Once he takes action, my whereabouts will soon be exposed. In the past, there was a wizard who broke the rules and started a massacre in many small towns. Later, before the law enforcers of the temple arrived, that person was arrested by the Wizard King and sentenced to death in the underground charaba. Wizard King. Dean raised his eyebrows. Is he more powerful than the 8 lords? Even so, he can't resist your witch blood spell, right? The Black Wizard smiled bitterly. The most terrible thing about the Wizard King is not his strength, but his omniscient and omnipotent witchcraft. Although my witch blood spell is magical, in his hands, it will definitely be broken. You have so much confidence in him. It can't be helped. He has the 3 great artifacts that all sorcerers dream of. All sorcerers will be defeated in front of these 3 great artifacts. The Sorcerer King is invincible with these 3 great artifacts in his hands. Dean was a little surprised. He said with interest, What 3 artifacts? Tell me about them. These 3 artifacts are God's eyes, Sun God's mirror, and the Pearl of the Dead. The dark wizard's eyes flickered with emotion and envy. The eye of gods can destroy all magi and see through all illusions. It can see through the microscopic mirror and solve all problems from the root. Sun God's mirror is even more powerful. It can emit magical rays, and according to legend, it can create light. As for the Pearl of the Dead, it is said that the voice of the dead can be heard from it, and the soul can be easily taken away. It is the only one among the 3 artifacts that has a very strong fighting ability. Even the Wall Lord is afraid of the Pearl of the Dead. This is the reason why the temple doesn't dare to exterminate us. Therefore, we can offend the temple and the Wall Lord, but we absolutely can't offend the Wizard King. Otherwise, no one can protect you. The Black Wizard was observing Dean's expression as he spoke. He was even more surprised to see that Dean was listening seriously. He just wanted to test him, but he didn't expect to find out that Dean was obviously not a wizard. However, it was obvious that it wasn't the first time that Dean had used the microscopic mirror. Was he from the Magic Research Institute? Did he betray the Magic Research Institute? The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was a possibility. Dean didn't know that the Black Magician was immersed in the joy of catching his weakness. He was shocked by the 3 artifacts that the Black Magician had mentioned, especially the Orb of the Dead. If it was just to hear the voice of the dead, he wouldn't care. He would even disdain it. Any phonograph will be able to do that. However, to be able to capture the soul, it was not within the scope of a phonograph. It seems that these 3 things should be very high-end instruments from the old era. I don't know what the prototype is. Dean's eyes flashed. His heart was boiling with excitement. If he could get these 3 instruments, his experiment would be more smooth. He thought of Crimson Moon and couldn't help but feel a trace of regret for her. If Crimson Moon knew about the giant wall and got these 3 artifacts, perhaps the experiment would have been successful. At this time, the sky was bright. The sound of knights training came from the training field behind the castle. The servants of the castle came out to work one after another. They carried water, washed clothes, and dried quilts. Dean put the witch blood technique in his arms and said, "Let's go out for a walk. I'll have to ask Barit about this." The Black Wizard's eyelids twitched when he saw Dean put away the witch blood technique. He knew that Dean had a handle on him. "Did you ask him about the experiment?" "Okay. If I meet the guard, tell him that you're taking me out to do something." Dean opened the door and said. The Black Wizard sighed bitterly and followed Dean. When the 2 went downstairs, the Black Wizard was in front and Dean was behind. Out of the Burn Castle, the position of the 2 was changed. Dean walked along the street with his hands behind his back and said, "The other master supported by the Burn family seems to be colluding with you, right?" The Black Wizard was surprised. He didn't expect Dean to know this. He suddenly felt that he couldn't see through Dean. The other side obviously didn't sneak into the castle for 2 days and knew so many secrets. It was likely that the other side had been paying attention to him for a long time. Thinking of this, the Black Wizard became more cautious. "He and I are in a cooperative relationship." The Black Wizard weighed his words. Dean nodded slightly as he got the Black Wizard's acknowledgement. Dudian went into a pub and ordered some good dishes to eat and drink. The Black Wizard frowned as he accompanied Dean. He was thinking of ways to get out of this situation, but he couldn't think of any way. After the meal, Dean bought a set of high-class clothes to set off the temperament of a young elite of the upper class. Then he bought a set of clothes to go to the black shop at night. He took the Black Wizard to hire a carriage and wandered around the city. He lifted the window and enjoyed the scenery along the way. From time to time, he would sigh. The Black Wizard was at a loss as he didn't know what Dean wanted to do. Dean changed 8 carriages. In just one day, he went around the entire Phoenix City. 2 Abyss Masters and 27 Masters. This is the power of the Phoenix Lord. The carriage passed by the Phoenix Lord's manor. Dean also saw the background of the Phoenix Lord. He sighed in his heart. The Phoenix Lord alone was enough to easily crush Sylvia. In the evening, the Black Wizard led Dean and the Black Wizard to the most lively black shop in the city. This was the most lively place and naturally the place with the highest consumption. The black shop was located in a bustling street. The shops on the street were jewelry, hotels, weapon shops, real estate rental places, and so on. Most of the people who came here were celebrities. The black shop was located in the underground of the entire street. There were 3 entrances. One of them was the underground passage of the tallest hotel on the street. According to the Black Wizard, the reason why there were 3 entrances was not only for convenience, but also for quick evacuation when the law enforcers of the temple were searching. However, this black shop was under the protection of the Phoenix Lord. The law enforcers of the temple wouldn't come over. It was the safest black shop. After coming out of the secret passage of the hotel, Dean saw a bright underground world. There were colorful lights hanging from the dome. Electricity was very popular here. All kinds of lighting bulbs were manufactured in a variety of styles. There were a large number of shops on both sides of the long passage. The owners of the shops were wearing ghost masks. They were waving flagpoles with advertising slogans to attract customers. It was very lively. Dean and the Black Wizard were also wearing masks. One had a leopard's head and the other had a wolf's head. They were mixed in the crowd. The wizards in the crowd were also wearing different types of masks. Some were wearing veils and masks to hide their faces in the dark. Dean's eyes swept along the shops on both sides of the street. He saw a lot of novel things. There were a lot of instruments used for experiments. He even saw a small flashlight and an electronic watch. In addition to these things, the more eye-catching were some experimental materials. Some were limbs soaked in jars. Some were the hearts of some rare monsters. There was also a red test tube marked with the blood of an aristocrat. Dean asked the Black Wizard in a low voice. He learned that the ancestor of this aristocrat was a king. He had an extremely outstanding fighting power. In the elder generation of this aristocrat, someone had awakened and gained extraordinary fighting power. Therefore, the blood of this aristocrat had good research value. Dean saw a microscope in one of the largest shops. The price of the microscope was slightly higher than what the black mage had said. It was 98,000 black gold coins. The price has increased again. Fortunately, I bought it early. The Black Wizard also saw it. He couldn't help but sigh. Dean walked around and saw the phonograph, camera, and other small items. The price was not cheap. The phonograph was 8,000 black gold, and the camera was 20,000 black gold. Dean asked the black mage to buy a set of the highest grade one for each of them. They walked in the passage while carrying the goods in their hands. The shop owners on both sides of the street were shouting at Dean and the Black Wizard even more enthusiastically. After visiting the shops, Dean and the Black Wizard came to the black shop at the end of the street. According to the Black Wizard, this was the place responsible for the wizard's registration and handling all kinds of wizard's problems. Dean went in and walked around. He knew that the Black Wizard's words were not false. He pulled a woman wearing a black robe and a rabbit mask and asked, "Have you heard of the 3 artifacts of the wizards? Tell me about them." The woman wearing the rabbit mask was suddenly pulled by Dean. Her body was startled. She looked at Dean coldly and said, "Let go." Dean glanced at the Black Wizard and gestured to him. The Black Wizard slightly smiled and coughed. He took out a black medal from his black robe. It was engraved with 5 stars. The woman wearing the rabbit mask saw the medal. The coldness in her eyes suddenly turned into astonishment. She hurriedly said, You are the holy shaman?" The Black Wizard lightly coughed and said, "Tell him about the 3 artifacts." He knew that Dean wanted to confirm his words. Fortunately, he didn't lie, and he wasn't weak. The woman wearing the rabbit mask was stunned. She quickly reacted and immediately explained to Dean. Her attitude was very respectful and detailed. After listening, Dean slightly nodded. It was roughly the same as what the Black Wizard said. He asked, "Do you know where the Wizard King lives?" The woman wearing the rabbit mask revealed a trace of strange color in her eyes. She shook her head and said, "I don't know. This is not something they can understand." The Black Wizard said, Chapter 10:27. Dark Mage was scared by Dean's words. Find the Wizard King? Do you want the 3 artifacts? Dean didn't deny. Lead the way and tell me about the Wizard King. Black Mage's face changed as he saw that Dean was serious. He quickly stepped forward and lowered his voice. Elder, this is not a trivial matter. Let's discuss it again. I'm begging you." Dean strode forward as if he didn't hear anything. The black wizard was a little anxious and followed closely beside him. He lowered his voice and said quickly, "Sir, the Mage King's whereabouts are uncertain. Even I don't know where he lives. We won't be able to find him. If you want the 3 divine weapons, I have other ways that might be able to satisfy your needs." "Oh." Dean's eyes lit up. "Let's hear it." The dark wizard heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly said, "My lord, the 3 divine tools that you want should be used for witchcraft or something, right? We can totally replace them with other divine tools that have similar functions, just that the effects are slightly weaker. For example." Dean frowned. The dark magician said in a low voice, "According to what I know, imitations of these 3 great divine weapons have appeared before. Someone had studied the effects of these 3 great divine weapons and wanted to recreate these 3 great divine weapons. Although their effects couldn't compare to the 3 great divine weapons in the end, they were still considered top-notch sorcerer weapons. Their names are the Eye of Divine Light, the Universal Magic Mirror, and the soul-captivating Divine Pearl. Moreover, apart from these 3 replicas, there are also a few top-notch wizard artifacts that have similar effects as the Eyes of Gods. They're considered as strengthened versions of the microscopic mirror. It's just that they're expensive, and they're all owned by their owners, so they're not sold on the market." "Do you know the owners of these artifacts?" Dean asked. The dark wizard nodded and said in a low voice, "Rather than looking for the Wizard King, why don't we look for these people first? If the wizard artifacts in their hands can't satisfy you, it won't be too late for us to look for the Wizard King. Don't you agree?" Dean nodded slightly. This was a good idea. He didn't want to provoke a tough bone like the Wizard King unless he had no other choice. But he had to figure out his physical condition as soon as possible. If he could survive, he had to hurry to find Aisha so that she wouldn't wander alone into the Devil's Pit or the area near the Empire. Although her strength had long been a middle-level Abyss Walker and was enough to run amok in the Abyss, there were many existences in the center of the Devil's Pit that were enough to threaten the upper Abyss, such as the Arctic Dragon that they had killed. Seeing that Dean had agreed, the Dark Mage was relieved. He was glad that he had managed to persuade Dean. If Dean had really planned to look for the Wizard King, he would most likely have become cannon fodder. "It's not a good place to talk about this, sir. Let's go out first." The Black Mage whispered to Dean as he looked at the wizards passing by. Dean looked at him, nodded, and followed him out of the black shop. The night was shrouded in darkness, and the stars dotted the sky. Dudeen and the Black Mage rented a room in a nearby hotel. Dudeen casually sat on the sofa and said to the Black Mage, "Speak." The Black Mage coughed and sat down on the sofa opposite to Dean. Of the 3 artifacts, the Universal Magic Mirror and the Soul Bead are in the hands of the 8 Lords. The Eye of God is in the hands of the Vice President of the Wizard Council. These 3 are not to be trifled with, especially the Vice President of the Council. He is a master of the Abyss. Moreover, 2 of his students have stepped into the Abyss. It is said that the strength of the Vice President is much more tyrannical than that of the 8 Lords. Dean frowned slightly. He was most concerned about the Eye of God. It was a super-enhanced version of the microscope. It should be able to see the molecular level and even the quark level. Dark Mage secretly glanced at Dean's expression and immediately said, "Elder, in addition to the 3 artifacts, there are 2 top-level artifacts that also have the ability to observe the microscopic world. Moreover, they're stronger than the Eye of God. They are the Eye of Destruction and the Lightning Filter. It is said that the Lightning Filter can see the movement of electricity. It is very magical." Dean's eyes lit up. "Can see the movement of electricity? Doesn't it mean that he can see the electronic level? Who has the Lightning Filter?" Dean immediately asked. "The Lightning Filter is in the hands of a member of the Wizard Council. Elder, if you want, we can think a way to get it. I know some information about this member. His name is Brank. He has the power of the Dominator level. However, it is said that every member has the protection of the Abyss level. He is in his 50s, but has created 6 5-star witchcraft. Each of them is enough to cause a devastating disaster in the city. Moreover, it is said that he has created a weapon called an electric gun. This weapon is classified as a taboo weapon and is not used. However, the guards around him are definitely equipped with this weapon. It is said that the power of the electric gun is more than 100 times that of a gunpowder gun. It is impossible to dodge, and the attack arrives in an instant. Moreover, it has a paralyzing effect. Even a group of pioneers with an electric gun can shoot the Dominator. Because of this, it is listed as a taboo by the Wizard King. Electric gun? Dean was startled. He thought of the laser gun. However, Brank had mastered the lightning filter. He should have relied on the lightning filter to invent this thing. It was still different from the laser gun. However, it was undeniable that if what the Black Mage said was true, then the electric gun was also a very terrible weapon. Do you know where he lives? Dean asked. The Black Mage coughed and said in a slightly embarrassed manner, "Well, the addresses of the members are very secretive. I don't know. Moreover, the members should have another identity. I don't know what the free identity of this member of the Parliament Brank is. However, from his previous resume, it seems that he is not short of money. He should come from a rich family." Speaking of this, his old face turned red. In the entire giant wall of Berga, there were at least 30,000 rich families. Dean frowned and thought for a moment. He suddenly asked, "Where do these members usually meet?" The Black Mage was relieved to see that Dean didn't blame him. When Dean asked, his eyes lit up, and he quickly said, "The members of the Parliament have several different meetings. The corresponding meeting places are also different. If it is a particularly big event, all the members of the Parliament will be called for a meeting at the headquarters of the Black Shop. If there is a problem in the area under the jurisdiction of a member of the Parliament, the Wizard King will send a representative to inquire about the situation and hold a temporary meeting with the local member of Parliament." He didn't wait for Dean to ask again. He excitedly said, "Elder, I know the jurisdiction of Brank. He is in the main city of the Nile Lord. He manages all the dark channels in the territory of the Nile Lord. As long as we cause trouble in the territory of the Nile Lord and break the rules of the wizards, the Wizard King will certainly send someone to find out the situation. At that time, we can lurk in the dark and find Brank." Dean got up. "Let's go." Before preparing to leave the Phoenix territory, the Black Mage handed a letter to the postman in front of Dean and sent it to the Born Lord. It could be regarded as a leave of absence. Then he followed Dean to the Nile territory. The Nile territory and the Phoenix territory were separated by a great distance. The two rushed through the suburbs. After half a day, they arrived in front of the Nile territory. After paying the entrance fee, they entered the main city of the Nile territory. The main city of the Nile territory was similar to the main city of the Phoenix territory. It was grand and spectacular. The security here seemed to be stricter than the Phoenix territory. From time to time, they could see teams of patrolling guards passing through the streets. What do you think is the fastest way to attract their attention? After entering the city, Dean asked the Black Mage as they walked on the street. The Black Mage saw that Dean had thrown this problem to him. He rolled his eyes and said, "Elder, we might as well secretly hunt some wizards. If we hunt a lot of them, it will certainly attract their attention. But they are your peers." Dean glanced at him. "I'm killing my peers." The Black Mage looked natural. He didn't feel that there was anything wrong. Dean shook his head. "That's too slow. I think that your witch blood technique can come in handy." The Black Mage's face slightly changed. He quickly said, "Elder, are you going to use the witch blood technique in the city? This will cause too much turmoil, and the damage will be too terrible. If the movement is not big, how can we attract their attention so quickly? But the people in the city are innocent. They're all our compatriots. Killing innocent people like this," Dean glanced at him. "How can the bones buried in the ground of Burn Manor be able to endure these words coming out of your mouth?" The Black Mage's face stiffened. He was embarrassed and no longer tried to persuade him. He had already guessed that the reason why Dean chose to use the witch blood technique was not only because the movement was big enough and fast enough. The most important thing was that the witch blood technique was created by him. This was tantamount to putting him in danger. So, he had to cooperate with Dean. Once Dean was finished, the witch blood technique would go out of control and he would be noticed by the Wizard King. Once the order to kill was issued, there would be no place for him in the whole world. I don't have the witch blood poison with me. How about we forget about it? The black mage struggled. Either go back and get it or find the materials in the nearby black shop to do it on the spot. Dean gave him two choices. The corner of the black mage's mouth slightly twitched. He sighed and chose to find the materials nearby to do it himself. Because the amount of witch blood poison he left in the Bourne family was very small, it wouldn't cause too much movement. 3 days later, Dean and the black mage sneaked into an underground public well in the city of Nile and put the witch blood poison into it. This well provided clothing, food, housing, and transportation for thousands of families every day. But these people who used the public well were the lowest level of the city. They were like rats in every corner of the city, doing hard labor, service, and so on. Every morning when the weather was cold, their wives would rush to the public well to fetch water, to wash their clothes, and then scoop water to bring back to cook. When the sky was bright, there was a long queue in front of the public well. The supply of well water could not meet the demand. In addition to the public well, Dean also sneaked into the manors of 2 minor nobles and put the witch blood poison into their well water. Next, we'll wait for your witch blood technique to break out. Dean and the black mage sat on a tall building, overlooking the building under their feet. The scenery from high places was always extremely vast. The black mage looked at the streets under the tall building. The passers-by were as small as ants. There was a smile on his face, but his heart was cold. Although he had caught a lot of people as test subjects, but the number of people he caught each time was not more than 10 because it was easy to be exposed if he caught too many. But this time Dean had killed thousands of people. He felt that he was ruthless enough, but the youth was colder and more vicious than him. In order to achieve the goal, he would do anything. On the 5th day after the witch blood poison was put in, bloodthirsty fights broke out one after another. It not only attracted the attention of the Defense Department in Nile territory, but also caused the black shops in the dark to close one after another. Many black shops were no longer open. It seems that the matter is almost fermented. We can go to the headquarters of Nile's black shop to have a look. The black mage took Dean out of a black shop and immediately turned towards the city center of Nile territory. Your 5-star wizard medal doesn't belong to this area. Can you go in? Dean asked. He had learned a lot of things from the black mage in the past few days. The wizards here were similar to the Dark Church in Sylvia. They couldn't see the light. He couldn't help but think that the Wizard King was played by the Wall Lord himself. There's no problem going in, but we can't participate in their meetings here. The black mage laughed. Dean nodded. The two came to the front of a manor in the city center of Nile territory. It was a huge manor. There were well-equipped knights standing in front of the gate. It looked more imposing than the Stantine and Bourne families that Dean had seen before. The black mage looked fearless. He whispered a few words in front of a knight, and then lifted his robe to reveal his chest. There was a black flame tattoo engraved on it. The knight who was ready to intercept was startled. He immediately stepped aside and gave way. His face was full of respect. The black mage put down his robe and strode forward. Dean followed behind, but his identity was not checked. After entering the manor, Dean immediately used his X-ray vision to scan the situation inside the manor. Soon, he found that there was a huge square under the manor. It was very lively. At the moment, there were many people gathered there, emitting firefly-like heat sources. Most of them were at the limitless level. A few of them were at the pioneer level, but only a few of them emitted heat sources as strong as the sun. They were masters like the black mage. However, there were also masters who knew how to hide the heat sources. The underground defense was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. Chapter 1028. 20 black gold coins for a radiation baby? Boss, you are robbing us. The shops in the underground world were very lively. A voice of dissatisfaction came from a shop on the left side of Dean and the black mage. Dean followed the voice and saw that the counter of the black shop was piled with all kinds of bottles and specimens nailed to wooden shelves. Most of them were strange flesh and blood, or some kind of limbs. Some of the bottles and jars were soaked with intact human babies. However, the soaked babies were somewhat deformed. Some had strange hands growing out of their abdomen. Some had cracked arms with a strange mouth. Dean saw that Dean was interested, so he whispered, "This person is buying radiation babies. It is a low-level witchcraft research material. It is also one of the raw materials of witch blood poison. The price is very cheap, but it is a bit expensive here. Generally, 10 black gold coins are enough. It's probably because the other black shops have all closed down, so the goods here have increased in value." Dean took back his eyes and asked as he walked forward, "Can this radiation baby be sold for 10 black gold coins?" 10 black gold coins were equivalent to 100 gold coins. In his knowledge, the orphans in the orphanage were sold for a few silver coins. These orphans lived in slums, drank heavily polluted water, ate poor quality bread, and had long been eroded by radiation. They could be regarded as radiation people. The black mage smiled. Most of the radiation babies sold in the black shop are of good quality. The radiation is more than 70%. For the average person to accumulate radiation in their body to such a degree, they need to live in a heavily polluted radiation zone for at least 2 or 3 years. If a newborn baby lives in such an environment, it is estimated that it will die in less than 3 days. Dean frowned. What are these? The infection of these radiation babies comes from the mother's body. Their mother's body itself has a high concentration of radiation. They live in a high radiation zone when they are pregnant. So when they are born, the radiation concentration in their body will exceed the limit. Moreover, they won't die. The black mage smiled. Some babies in the mother's body can't withstand the radiation contained in the mother's body. They will die early. So it is quite time-consuming and laborious to make radiation babies. 10 black gold coins is not expensive, but 20 is a bit too much. Dean was silent. What kind of horrible and dark industrial chain was this? Such an industrial chain was one of the many products in the black shop. Did you hear? Camp District was attacked by witchcraft. I've known about it for a long time. I don't know which bastard did it, but he caused all the black shops to close down and reorganize, causing the items in the headquarters to be sold at sky-high prices. My experiment just happened to reach a bottleneck, and I urgently need materials. Damn it, it's probably some wandering wizard who did it. How despicable. The people living in Camp District are all civilians. It's understandable if this person cast witchcraft on some nobles or rich people. At least he can make some money. What's there to harm those useless people in Camp District? The energy wasted to kill them is worth more than their lives. With such a huge commotion, this idiot is definitely done for. The masked wizards around him were talking among themselves, and the witch blood spell was mentioned from time to time. The dark magician's hearing was extraordinary, so he naturally heard everything. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. This was the first time he had been scolded by so many people, and they were all in the same profession. He looked at Dean and said in an aggrieved tone, "Elder, you can't ignore me if the witch blood technique is found out." Dean glanced at him. "Even if you're found out, you have the means to get out." The dark magician smiled. "Elder, you think too highly of me. Can you sense it? Which one is Brank?" Dean looked at the towering building at the end of the underground square. His eyes flashed. The dark magician's eyes showed a bit of seriousness. He carefully looked at the building for a moment, then shook his head. "I can't sense it. There's a strange fragrance outside the shop, so I can't smell out the situation inside." Dean slightly frowned. He also smelled the strange fragrance. The fragrance was very light, but it lingered around the building for a long time. It was like a fragrant barrier that shrouded the building. However, it didn't affect his X-ray vision. There were so many people inside, and there was no dark magician to point out Brank's identity. He could only rely on himself to slowly observe. At this time, there was a sudden commotion behind the square. "Get out of the way! Get out of the way!" A shout came from behind. The crowd quickly crowded and pushed Dean and the dark magician to the side of the road. Dean turned around and saw a group of knights in black armor with dark red scepter patterns striding from the back. In the middle of the team of knights was a black-robed figure wearing a smiling fox mask. It's Brank. How come he is here? Don't you know? It must be because of the matter in camp area. It seems that the rogue wizard who caused trouble will be punished soon. The crowd was talking about it. Dean was startled. He didn't expect the latter to appear so quickly. It was so easy to get him. He looked at the dark magician. The dark magician whispered, "Elder, I'm not familiar with Brank. They are local wizards. You can't blame me. I absolutely didn't mean to hide." Dean made a shushing gesture and looked up at Brank, who was slowly walking under the escort of the Black Knights. Golden light flashed in his eyes. His sight instantly penetrated through the mask. He was a little surprised. Brank's mask wasn't made of ordinary plastic or metal. It was made of some kind of alloy and fiber. It looked like a big net. From the structure, it was not only a mask, but also had a very strong defense. It was estimated that ordinary rifle bullets wouldn't be able to penetrate it. Under the mask was a plain, middle-aged man's face. The only thing that left a deep impression was his eyes. They were restrained and calm, deep and wise. It was like two dark stars embedded in his face, embellishing his ordinary face with a unique style. Dean took a deep look and remembered the face. Just as he was about to withdraw his gaze, he suddenly saw something in his line of sight. He could not help but be startled. Immediately, the golden light appeared in his pupils again. His gaze went straight through the fox mask and shot at the middle-aged man's face. Soon, it penetrated again. He suddenly found that what he had seen before was right. This ordinary face was actually a mask. The material was gelatinous and very thin. Double mask? Dean's eyes moved. His sight quickly penetrated the deepest part of the man's brain. Then he quickly withdrew his eyes and pretended to be nonchalant. Brank felt a strange sensation on his face, as if something terrifying was staring at him. He turned his gaze to the crowd on both sides of the road. He saw many strange masks, as well as expressions of excitement, surprise, respect, and indifference behind the masks. Among them, there was no lack of hatred that flashed across the eyes of some of them. Brank caught it. However, he didn't feel that the man with hatred in his eyes was strong. "What's going on?" Brank was puzzled. The strange feeling had disappeared. It was like an illusion, but the feeling of horror was very real. He suddenly felt that the wizard attack in the Kemp district was not just an ordinary wizard breaking the rules. Maybe there was some other conspiracy behind it. Soon, Brank walked past him. Dean quietly watched him leave and entered the palace-like building behind the square. The crowd that had been split apart gathered together again and dispersed. "Are you sure that Brank is in his 50s? Dean stared at the black mage and asked after the crowd dispersed. The sorcerer was surprised and quickly said, "Elder, many wizards know this. If you don't believe me, you can ask them. I've also heard about it. If I'm wrong, then everyone is wrong. Is there any wizard here who can restore the appearance of a man in his 50s to the appearance of a young man in his 20s? Dean asked. The sorcerer was stunned. He knew that Dean was referring to Brank. But wasn't Brank wearing a mask? How did Dean know that his face was that of a young man in his 20s? Soon, he thought of Dean's perception ability. His eyes flashed a trace of shock, but soon he realized that he couldn't let Dean know that he was aware of it. He quickly took the opportunity to say, "A man in his 50s has the face of a young man in his 20s? How is that possible?" Dean frowned as he looked at him. He didn't say anything as he turned and walked toward the palace. The sorcerer quickly caught up with him. "Elder, let's wait outside. It's too dangerous to go in." "I know." Outside the palace, Dean stopped in front of a shop and asked the black mage to buy a few tools. Then the two of them rested in a corner. It seems that his identity is real, Dean murmured in his heart. Golden light flashed in his eyes. Through his X-ray vision, he saw that the people along the way took the initiative to greet him. The people who were sitting quickly stood up, and the people who were standing quickly greeted him. Their attitude was very respectful. It seemed that this wasn't a disguise of a stand-in. After Brank entered the building, he called more than a dozen people to have a meeting on the third floor. Dean could read their lips. They were talking about the witch's blood. Dean quietly watched them discuss and make decisions. His eyes turned to the 8 black knights who accompanied Brank. All of them were equipped with a knight's spear and a sword. At first glance, they didn't look any different from ordinary knights. However, their physiques were quite amazing. Although all of them had suppressed the heat reaction, but the density of the bones and the internal structure of the body were all at the Dominator level. Dean used X-ray vision to observe the body structure of people with different physiques. He already had a set of methods to distinguish the strength of the internal organs of the body. Bone density was just one of them. He found that the higher the physique, the more complex the internal structure of the body. The number of bones and the changes of the nerves were completely different from normal humans. This was the transformation of the magic marks. The higher the physique, the larger the transformation of the body. This kind of modified body was also more suitable for a larger area of the demon body or even a full demon body. He should be at the peak of the Dominator level. His bones have grown scales, and his heart is surrounded by complex ribs. It seems that his ability should be related to defense. Dean's eyes lit up. Even if such a fighting capacity wasn't as good as the Abyss, wouldn't be much worse. If their ability was special, then they could even trap and kill the Abyss. Brank is a member of Parliament, but he isn't an Abyss. He should be lacking the Ice Worm King. Dean thought. It seemed that even in the giant wall, the Ice Worm King was a rare existence. It meant that it would be extremely difficult for Barton and the others to advance to the Abyss level. 2 hours later, the meeting ended. Brank went to the office in the building to check the documents. Dean waited for him to come out after 4 or 5 hours. He called the Black Magician and followed the 8 knights to leave the underground black shop. Elder, should we follow them? The Black Mage asked Dean. He didn't see Brank and the 8 knights outside the manor. He tried to use his sense of smell to track them, but found that the smell had disappeared. Don't worry, we will be exposed if we get too close, Dean said. He suspected that Brank had noticed him when he used his X-ray vision. Brank had ordered his men to pay attention to the people who were going in and out of the Nile shop's headquarters. They had to register their names to prevent people from sneaking in. But they are gone, the Black Mage said anxiously. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Dean's eyes flashed. Out of the manor, Dean quickly moved forward, jumped to the roof of the street, and quickly chased in one direction. The Black Mage saw that Dean seemed to be able to find Brank, so he quickly followed. 10 minutes later, Dean and the Black Mage stopped under a towering clock tower. The Black Mage looked ahead and saw a few streets away. There were 8 figures in black robes riding fast horses. They were escorting a person in the same black robe. These people stopped in front of a red wine manor. There were many guests coming in and out of the manor. The Black Mage's face slightly changed. He is going to mix into the crowd. Dean whispered, I've locked him. The Black Mage looked at him and saw the golden light in Dean's eyes. He inexplicably felt a trace of palpitation. At this time, Dean saw Brank and his 8 guards enter the red wine manor. They went straight to the cellar. The cellar was full of wine, and ordinary guests couldn't enter. Soon, Brank and the 8 guards were served by a graceful and beautiful woman behind the counter of the red wine manor. They took off all the masks and put on suits, tuxedos, and so on. After a while, the 8 guards and Brank came out of the manor. They were like successful people as they mixed into the surrounding guests. Chapter 10:29. Dean watched Brank and others leave the winery. They took the carriage that was already prepared at the entrance. After they left, he called the Black Mage and called a carriage from the side of the street. Outside the winery was a bustling area. There were often carriages coming here to pull guests, so he didn't have to wait too long. Have they come out? The Black Mage was surprised to see Dean call a carriage. He had carefully observed all the people that came out of the winery, but didn't find anything suspicious. Dean didn't answer him. He turned around and got into the carriage. The Black Mage quickly followed. The coachman whipped the horse and slowly drove the carriage. The coachman asked the two, "Where are you going?" "Go straight ahead," Dean ordered. There's no name of the place." Before the coachman could finish his words, a gold coin bounced onto the chair beside him, causing it to tremble slightly. His eyelids also trembled slightly, and the words in his mouth immediately stopped. For him, a gold coin was equivalent to half a month's travel. Moreover, the business was booming. The coachman didn't talk anymore and drove the carriage forward. "Turn left at the intersection in front," Dean commanded. "Yes, sir." The coachman hurriedly responded and turned the carriage. 2 hours later, the carriage stopped in front of a magnificent and spacious manor. Outside the manor, there were 2 knights stationed every 200 meters, all of whom were pioneers. There were 12 knights in silver armor guarding the front gate. Through the gaps of the iron bars of the front gate, Zhang Tai could see the verdant grassland in the manor, which extended far away. At the end of the grassland, there were the outlines of towering buildings. "It's here." The black mage was surprised. "We have passed by this street several times before." "Why?" Suddenly he realized that the other side was worried about being followed and deliberately took a detour. Dean got off the carriage. In his field of vision, Bronk and his 8 guards had entered the manor in batches. The area of the manor was very large. It was equivalent to the area of 5 international football fields. Horses could gallop on the gravel path inside the manor. 3 rulers. Dujian's eyes flashed as he saw the scene in the manor. In addition to Brank and his 8 guards, there were 3 rulers in the manor. They didn't hide the heat source, but their aura was much stronger than the 8 guards. Black Mage whispered to Dudian, "We will wait for the night. The vigilance is too strong during the day." Dean shook his head. "You will think so, but others will think so too. The night is more vigilant. No one would think that someone would dare to break in during the day. For the people here, there is no difference between night and day. They can only hide from the eyes and ears of ordinary knights." Black Mage was startled, but immediately felt that Dean's words were reasonable. He asked, "Should we make a plan? Let's first understand the guards here. It's best to sneak in or disguise as a servant." Dean looked up and glanced around. After a moment, he said, "Make some noise to attract his guards. I'll take the opportunity to sneak in and find Brank." Black Mage's eyes widened. "I'll attract his guards? Isn't this too difficult? You're trying to kill me." Although he was also a ruler, he was not good at fighting. The other side had 7 or 8 rulers. Letting him attract the firepower was no different from sending himself to death. He felt that Dean was ready to use him as a sacrificial pawn. Suddenly, another idea came to his mind. Dean indifferently said, "You can't think of things in this way. First of all, you will attract the firepower and they will chase you. Once they catch up with you and find out that Brank and their master are missing, they will soon understand that they have fallen into a trap. They will know that you have accomplices. Will they still kill you? Of course not. They will torture you and make you confess. At this time, I can kidnap Brank and come back to rescue you. At that time, you'll be alive and Brank will fall into our hands. It will be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. At most, you will suffer a little." Black Mage was stunned and looked at him. After a few seconds, he suddenly reacted. It seemed that it was the truth. However, he wasn't a person who could be fooled by a few words. He doubtfully asked, "How can you be sure that you will catch Brank? In case you can't catch him and the plan fails, then I will fall into their hands. Won't I die? Because I need the Thunderbolt filter, so I will catch him." Dean indifferently said, "If it wasn't for the fact that the other forces in the city or the Lord of Nile would come to support us, then you wouldn't need to do anything. I can solve it by myself. But it's not safe enough. In case they have some special ability and are pinned down, then things will go to an unpredictable step." Black Mage was stunned when he saw that Dean had taken reinforcements into consideration. He suddenly felt that Dean's considerations were more thorough than his own. No wonder Dean was able to sneak into the Bourne family and arrest him so easily. At this moment, they had a common goal. He suddenly felt that it was a good thing to have a partner like Dean. He thought for a moment. "According to you, the more guards I attract, the greater the chance of success?" "Yes." Black Mage took a deep breath. "All right, I'll do it." Dean was more or less surprised as he looked at Black Mage. He thought that he would have to waste a lot of time. He didn't expect Black Mage to think it through. Dark Mage agreed very quickly, but he had already thought about it. Even if he refused, Dean would send him. He was now a prisoner and had no choice. So it was better to take the initiative to agree. Moreover, he felt that he was useful to Dean. Dean wouldn't abandon him so easily as long as he could capture Brank. His heart was full of confidence as he thought about the terrifying tailblade that Dean had used to suppress him. Although his fighting strength belonged to the lower level of the Dominators, but his vision wasn't bad. He could see that Dean was an Abyss expert. No matter how strong Brank was, it would be difficult for him to resist an Abyss expert. After making the decision, the Black Magician and Dean discussed the details again. Then he went to the side of the manor alone and suddenly appeared. He killed the 2 knights in front of the side wall and then flew into the manor like a rock spreading its wings. He quickly rushed towards the castles in the distance. Enemy attack. Someone broke in. Someone come quickly. Someone has broken in. Alarms sounded all over the manor. A large number of patrolling knights quickly rushed to the front of the castle. They saw the Black Mage rushing towards them. Black Mage was wearing a mask. He roared as he rushed into the patrolling knights. He was like a wolf in a flock of sheep. He killed several people in an instant. His attacks were extremely cruel. In a short time, his whole body was stained with blood. "You're courting death." A thunderous roar echoed from the top of the castle. A figure flew out from the top floor of the castle. He was holding a golden spear as he attacked the Black Mage. Black Mage roared as he threw the knight next to him. Puff! The golden spear pierced through the knight's body. The latter didn't care about the life or death of the knight. "Blood feud. I'll kill you." The Black Mage roared towards the sky, his voice echoing throughout several ancient castles. He entered his demonic body and leaped up to meet the golden divine spear. His demonized hand slapped the spear's shaft, and with a bang, he felt his hand go numb from the impact. He couldn't help but shiver in fear. He borrowed the force to retreat and turned into a black shadow, fleeing at top speed. "Want to leave?" The young man with the golden spear roared, and a pair of dragon wings extended from his back. His entire body was demonized, and his golden armor cracked and fell to the ground. He turned into a golden dragon and chased after the dark sorcerer. At the same time, 4 figures suddenly flew out of the castle and followed closely behind him. "Get out! Get out!" Black Mage roared as he looked at the patrolling knights. He was flustered and exasperated. He could feel that in addition to the youth with the golden spear, there were 4 more people chasing after him. Their strength wasn't inferior to his. He didn't dare to think about fighting against 5 people. He just wanted to escape as far as possible to buy time for Dean. He knew that the longer he delayed, the higher the chance of Dean's success and the greater his chance of survival. Therefore, he had to try his best to attract Dean's firepower. He even deliberately talked about blood feud to let Brank know that he was his enemy. Once he let such an enemy go, who knew where he would hide and shoot arrows at him in the future? That was why Brank would definitely send more people to chase after him, just to be safe. However, if he sent 4 more people at once they caught up to him or pinned him down, he would probably be defeated very quickly. Whoosh! The Dark Magician charged into the group of patrolling knights like a tyrannosaurus, waving his sharp claws and tearing apart the knights blocking his way. The soles of his feet left huge pits in the ground as he charged out of the manor in the blink of an eye. He immediately ran toward the crowded streets. Whoosh! The golden dragon roared as it chased after him at full speed. "Father, is this ruler your enemy?" Inside the ancient castle, in front of the window of an office, stood a handsome blond young man. He had sword-like eyebrows, starry eyes, a high-nosed bridge, and thin lips that appeared a little sharp and fickle. At this moment, he was looking into the distance and only withdrew his gaze after he saw the golden wyvern and the 4 people behind him disappear from his sight. Then he asked Bolink, who was sitting in the office, who was grading documents. Brank said indifferently, "Since he broke into here, naturally he is my enemy." The golden-haired youth looked at his father's calm expression, and his heart was filled with admiration, yearning, and worship. Ever since he was young, no matter what happened, his father was always so calm, as if nothing could make him lose his composure. Although our family's businesses have some gray income, but it shouldn't provoke such an enemy. Is it a wizard? The blond youth asked curiously. I don't know, Brank said indifferently. I've offended too many people in this line of work, too many to count. Maybe it's a sorcerer whose witchcraft was stolen, or a child of a broken family who went astray and grew up to become a ruler with hatred in his heart. Maybe it's a bastard child of a woman. The blond youth was startled. He couldn't help but sigh softly. Indeed, a tall tree attracts the wind. Apart from the people they offended, the people their family's subordinates offended outside would also blame it on them. There were too many enemies to count. However, he wasn't afraid. Instead, he felt proud. The number of enemies meant that they were extraordinary. After all, the more ordinary a person was, the fewer enemies they had. Just as he was thinking about this, he suddenly felt a gust of cold wind at his neck. The air turned cold, as if winter had suddenly arrived. He couldn't help but look at the window behind him. The trees in the courtyard outside were filled with yellowed maple leaves. It was still autumn. Why was it so cold? When he retracted his gaze and was about to ask his father more questions, he suddenly noticed that there was another figure in the room. It was a young man in a black robe with a hood over his head. However, the hood had already been taken off, revealing a leopard mask on his face. It was a little strange. A wizard. The blond youth's pupils shrank. He immediately recognized the attire. He couldn't help but open his mouth to shout, but the next moment, he felt his body stiffen. It was as if the blood in his body had solidified. His limbs were frozen, and he couldn't move. The intense fear made his mouth open, but he couldn't make a sound. He could only hear his heart pounding madly. He never thought that there would be anything that could frighten him to this extent. Even if it was a poisonous snake that he hated the most, he wouldn't be so scared that he couldn't speak. However, at this moment, he felt an indescribable fear. It was even more terrifying than seeing thousands of poisonous snakes in front of him. He couldn't tell what he was afraid of. It was obviously a human. Brank's face was gloomy. His eyes were fixed on the figure that suddenly appeared in front of him. Even with his perception, he couldn't figure out how this person came here. Moreover, he suddenly realized that sending the 4 guards to chase after him seemed to be a wrong choice. It was the simplest strategy to lure the tiger away from the mountain, but he had fallen into it. Who are you? Brank took a deep breath. Under the table, his palm moved very slowly to the bottom of the drawer. There was a button there. At this time, he saw Dean take off the mask. His heart sank. The other side wasn't afraid of revealing his true face. It meant that today's matter wouldn't end well. Whoosh! He quickly touched the button. Puff! The table suddenly cracked. It seemed that the function of the button was to split the table. Brank's finger had just touched the button, but before he could press it, the table had already cracked. Even the wires behind the button were cut and destroyed. Chapter 10:30. Brank's expression turned ugly. He could feel a strange, killing intent locking onto him. Any reaction of his body would be detected. He took a deep breath and calmed himself down. He believed that even if he didn't give the alarm, they would still be aware of the situation here. What he needed to do now was to stabilize the current situation, and it would be best if he could understand the enemy at the same time. You're in cahoots with the person outside, right? Brank stared at Dean. If I'm not wrong, you should be related to the witchcraft incident in camp. What's your purpose? To kill me? Or do you want to get something from me? It's easy to talk to a smart person. Dean smiled. I heard that you have a tool called Thunder Filter. Can I borrow it? Brank was startled, but he was relieved in his heart. What Thunder Filter? I've never heard of it. Dean shook his head. I just praised you for being smart, and now you're panting. Do you think we didn't investigate in advance when we attacked your house and took such a big risk? Or are you deliberately stalling for time to wait for them to come and rescue you? Brank's face sank. Even if the Thunder Filter is in my hands, I won't lend it to you. It's a top-level tool, a treasure that can't be copied. If it's broken, it'll be broken forever. No one knows how to repair it. Even I won't use it easily." Dean looked at him seriously. Their eyes met. Brank also looked at Dean. His eyes were firm and unyielding. "All right." Dean sighed and took the lead to move his eyes away. Brank heaved a sigh of relief. He felt that he had the situation under control for the time being. However, in the next moment, a blood-curdling scream was heard. He looked towards the source of the scream, and his expression immediately changed. Furious, he abruptly stood up from his chair. He saw that the golden-haired youth by the window had a black blade piercing through his heart, nailing his entire body to the wall. The scream did not last for long before it abruptly stopped, and his head drooped down powerlessly. "You!" Brank's face was pale. His eyes were wide open. Black mucus surged and quickly entered the devil's body. But when the devil's body was halfway into the devil's body, a figure flashed in front of him. Dean's palm hit his shoulder. Brank felt as if his shoulder was broken. His whole body sank down. The next moment, a touch of coldness and tingling came from his neck. He slightly lowered his eyebrows. He saw that Dean's arm had turned into a sharp blade and was on his neck. The black, viscous liquid that was surging all over his body suddenly stopped. Then, like boiling water that had been extinguished, it slowly converged and sank. "Your wife, daughter, grandchildren, and your own life are here. Who do you think is more important compared to the thunder filter?" Dean softly asked. There was a trace of panic in the depths of his eyes. Dean was more terrible than he had imagined. It was the first time that he met someone who could force him to enter the devil's body. The most important thing was that Dean didn't enter the devil's body. How could he break out such a terrifying speed with just his human body? The most important thing was that the Dean was not the devil's body. Even if the Lord of Nile was here, he may not be able to save him. Suddenly, the door of the room was knocked open. At the same time, the roof above Dean's head burst open and a figure jumped down. In addition, another person jumped into the window. In a blink of an eye, there were 4 people standing in the room, completely surrounding Dean. They were the remaining 4 of the 8 guards who had been guarding Dean. "Master!" The 4 of them saw Brank, who was held hostage by Dean, and the blonde youth who was nailed to the windowsill. They didn't know that the enemy had broken into the room. If it wasn't for the blonde youth's scream, they wouldn't have known the situation here. "The loyal dog is here." Dean glanced at the 4 of them and smiled. "Have you decided?" Brank's face changed. After a moment, he took a deep breath and said, "I promise you, Master." The 4 of them didn't know what Brank had promised. They couldn't help but call out to each other. They wanted to find a flaw to attack and rescue Brank. Brank knew that the 4 of them couldn't save him from the hands of the devil. He sighed, "Don't worry. I'll take him to get the thunder filter." The 4 of them were startled. They knew Dean's purpose and started to slowly retreat. Dean carried Brank out of the room and asked him to show them the way. The 4 of them looked at each other after Dean left the room. 2 of them followed from behind, while the other 2 left from another exit. They were going to ambush the thunder filter before Dean did. After a moment, Dean and Brank came to the basement of the castle. They passed through layers of traps. Under Brank's guidance, the traps were canceled in advance. Finally, the 2 of them stopped in front of a secret room in the basement. The door of the secret room slowly rose, and a magical instrument appeared in front of them. "So this is the thunder filter?" There was a trace of surprise in Dean's eyes. The instrument was like a 3-meter-high globe. However, it wasn't the earth that was embedded in the middle of the instrument, but a circular ring. The edge of the metal ring was engraved with mysterious and complex runes. It looked like some kind of language. The ring and the tray of the instrument were connected by a cylindrical mirror. The cylindrical mirror could be bent to be vertical with the instrument. The whole instrument didn't look complicated. In fact, it was quite simple. It was even more common than a microscope. "This is the thunder filter you want." Brank's eyes were gloomy. "You can take it, but you have to promise me that you won't cause trouble for my family." Dean took him to the front of the thunder filter. He looked at it for a moment and asked, "How do I use this thing?" Brank hesitated for a moment, but still came forward to give him directions. "This is the switch. The thunder filter relies on electricity. but there is a battery inside. You can charge it after the battery is used up. This is the observation lens. This is the sample holder lens. This is the multiplier lens. Dean listened carefully. The thunder filter looked very simple. It looked like a simple metal ring. He didn't expect that there would be many small things on it. However, the overall operation wasn't complicated. It was similar to a microscope. "Open it and let me see," Dean told Brank. He didn't do it himself. After all, there was electricity in the giant wall. Even if he was an abyss, he would be turned into ashes in front of the overload of voltage. Brank sighed in his heart as he saw Dean being so cautious. But he didn't deceive Dean. He immediately started the operation and opened the thunder filter. Hiss! When the filter was opened, Dean saw that the metal ring was emitting electric light. The complex runes engraved around the metal ring flashed with mysterious blue light. It was like a circuit that lit up the entire metal ring. Soon, more and more electric light flashed inside the metal ring. It seemed that there was a specific magnetic field inside the ring that was pulling the flashing electric current. It didn't take long for the electric current to form a large net inside the metal ring. It looked extremely shocking. You were going to observe a strand of hair. Brank pulled a silver hair from his head and threw it into the flashing electric current inside the metal ring. The silver hair was instantly hit by the electric current and turned into powder. At this time, Brank came to the observation lens next to the metal ring. He wasn't afraid of the flashing electric current. He moved his eyes to the cylinder and said, "Now you can see the composition of the hair. Do you want to take a look?" Dean was startled. He didn't expect the use of the thunder filter to be like this. It was the first time that he heard that the object could be decomposed by electric current. Wouldn't the experiment be destroyed? He didn't ask, but looked through the observation lens according to Brank's words. However, he did not approach it directly. Instead, he tried his best to observe it from a distance. Soon, he saw countless tiny moving balls in the observation mirror. They were pitch black and looked like black grapes. Is this the structure of the hair? Dean frowned slightly. He felt that the thunder filter wasn't very useful to him because he didn't know which layer of the hair he was looking at. However, since he had succeeded, he didn't want to waste his effort. "Turn it off," Dean said. Brank immediately turned off the button. The flashing electric current inside the metal ring gradually decreased until it was extinguished. The secret room returned to darkness. There was no sound of electric current flashing. Where did this thing come from? From the ruins? Dean tentatively reached out and touched the metal ring. It was a little warm. He estimated that it would get hot after a long time. He looked at the runes engraved on the ring. He suddenly felt that this thing didn't seem to be from the old era. Indeed, Brank's words confirmed his conjecture. It said that it was found in an ancient civilization spaceship in the depths of the demonic abyss. It's well preserved, but unfortunately, that ancient civilization spaceship seemed to have been destroyed. It's been in disrepair for many years and is now in tatters. At this point, even though he was in danger, Brank still felt that it was a pity. Sure enough, it belongs to those insects. Dean's eyes flashed. Since the last time he saw the spaceship in the ice dragon's nest, he was basically sure that the insects came from another planet. They were able to cross the sea of stars to invade the Earth. They must have mastered technology that humans didn't have. After all, human technology couldn't carry people out of the solar system before the destruction of the old era. Dean thought that even if it was useless to him at present, it would have a very high research value. "Is there any packaging?" Dean asked Brank. Brank knew that this was the difficult part. "No, it takes several people to carry it carefully. Otherwise, it may be damaged if there's a little bump. That's why I haven't moved this thing since it was brought here." Dean slightly frowned and didn't say anything. Brank secretly sneered in his heart. He guessed that Dean wouldn't have too many accomplices. He estimated that there were at most 3 people. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent only one person to lure his guards. In case of failure, then the risk would be too great. Moreover, even if Dean had accomplices, he wouldn't dare to come over. His guards weren't vegetarians. "Well, call your guards." Dean thought for a moment and said. Brank was surprised. "Call them over? Help carry it," Dean said. Brank almost choked on his own saliva. He couldn't help but stare at Dean. But in the end, he softened as he looked at Dean's unquestionable expression. He felt like he was being robbed by a dog. Not to mention that Dean wanted him to send people to help carry it. Was there such a thing? Was there? Dean left the underground chamber with Brank. He went to the door and looked at the 3 hidden guards. There were 2 guards outside the door who didn't hide their aura. He indifferently said, "All 5 of you, come over." The pupils of the 3 guards who were hiding in the dark shrank as they heard Dadian say out the number of people. Their eyes were full of shock. The 3 of them were the best at lurking among the guards. They didn't expect to be seen through by Dadian. From smell, life response, heartbeat, heat, they believed that all of this had been concealed. They were no different from rocks when they hid in the surroundings. Even in the Devil's Pit, they were able to hide from the hunters of the abyss. But now they were seen through. Brank's eyelids twitched. He only saw 2 guards, but he knew that there must be an ambush in the dark. He didn't expect Dean to say it out loud. The last trace of hope in his heart was shattered. The one licking his lips, "Why don't you come out?" Dean opened his mouth again. A young man who was hiding in the dark stiffened. He didn't dare to move. But soon, like a deflated ball, he slowly came out from the dark. If he still thought that Dean was deliberately blackmailing him, then his brain was really messed up. The other 2 people hiding in the dark saw this and were shocked. They slowly walked out. "You come and talk to them." Dean looked at the 5 people standing in front of him and said to Brank. Brank's mouth slightly twitched. He resisted the urge to pinch Dean's neck. He gritted his teeth and said, "The 5 of you come with me to the secret chamber. Bring out the thunder filter and help him take it out." The 5 of them were dumbfounded. They looked at each other in dismay. They suspected that their ears were playing tricks on them. But looking at Brank's constipated expression, they were convinced that Dean wasn't joking. 10 minutes later, Dean held Brank hostage and walked out of the manor. The 5 guards behind them were carrying the thunder filter. Their movements were very careful. They didn't dare to let the thunder filter have any damage. "It seems that I won't be able to wait for Lornile to come." Dean looked at the street outside the manor and said softly, Chapter 10:31. Dean held Brank in his hand as he left the manor. He followed the direction that the black mage had escaped to. They jumped over the roofs of the buildings on the street as if they were a group of assassins and thieves wandering on the edge of gray. After a moment, Dean met the black mage on a building at the edge of the square. He had been caught, and one of his arms was cut off. His whole body was bathed in blood. It seemed that he had experienced a fierce battle. The one holding the black mage was a handsome young man with a golden spear. There were 4 guards beside him, all of whom had already released their demonic forms. At this moment, they were leading the black mage back the way they came, ready to hand him over to Bowling to deal with. The handsome youth and the others were stunned when they saw Dean and Brank. They didn't expect to see their master here. The black mage, who was pretending to be in pain, stopped when he saw Dean holding Brank. His eyes were stained with sticky blood. His face was full of surprise. He didn't expect that Dean would succeed. Moreover, they found him so quickly. In this way, he was saved from the pain of being escorted back to be interrogated. "Master." The handsome youth looked at Brank, who had a gloomy face. He saw the 5 people behind Brank and saw that they were carrying the lightning filter. He couldn't help but widen his eyes. They soon understood that they had fallen into the enemy's trap. "How dare you betray the master?" The handsome youth shouted at the 5 people who were carrying the lightning filter. The 5 people's mouths twitched, but they didn't answer. Brank sighed. "You guys let him go." Dean smiled, smart. "You know what I'm going to say." Brank didn't feel happy when he was praised by Dean. Instead, he felt insulted. The handsome youth and the 4 people's faces slightly changed. The handsome youth immediately said, "Master, this person is his accomplice. We can't let him go so easily." Then he shouted at Dadian, "You let go of my master and I'll let him go. 1 for 1. Dadian smiled. "Do you think his life could be compared with your master's?" The handsome youth sneered. "Since you have found him, it's hard to say whether he's worth the exchange or not." "Really?" Dean looked at Brock. "Your slaves don't seem to care about your life and death." In that case, let them open their eyes. For example, like this. His palm turned and Bronk's arm was twisted to 180 degrees. Kacha! Kacha! The sound of bones breaking echoed. Blanc screamed in pain, cold sweat dripping down his forehead. Quick, let him go. The handsome youth's face changed. He was shocked. He didn't expect Dean to be so unscrupulous and not afraid to anger him. He wanted to use Dean to torture the hostage face to face and tear off Dean's indifferent mask, but he didn't dare to gamble. Moreover, the chip was his master who had saved his life. Get lost. The handsome youth clenched his teeth and coldly pushed the black mage out. He believed that even if the black mage returned to Dean's side, he would still hold a grudge for today's matter. There would be a gap between the two of them. The black mage was relieved and quickly trotted in front of Dean. His heart was filled with resentment towards the handsome youth. He was afraid that the latter's attitude would be tough. He felt that Dean would really abandon him. After all, his weight couldn't be compared to Brank's. Fortunately, Brank was afraid of death, so he admitted defeat. Otherwise, he would be in real danger today. Let them get out of here, Dean said to Brank. Brank slightly gritted his teeth as he endured the pain and humiliation. You go back first. Master. The handsome youth couldn't help but call out. Be obedient. Brank's voice was a bit heavier. The handsome youth slightly gritted his teeth and finally led the 4 guards to retreat. If I find out that you are secretly following me, I won't lose my life, but I won't live a comfortable life. Dean carried Brank as he passed by them. The handsome youth's eyebrows were raised as he looked at Dean's back. He clenched his fists. Can you walk by yourself? Dean looked at the black sorcerer who was limping in front of him after he got rid of the handsome youth and others. The black mage slightly grinned. There was a bit of pain on his face. It's okay. Fortunately, you came in time. Otherwise, I would have been killed by those bastards. Dean nodded slightly. Since it's okay, you are responsible for carrying the thunder filter. Is there any problem? The black mage was stunned. He slightly opened his mouth and looked at him. Dean didn't seem to be deliberately joking. He looked at the 5 guards carrying the thunder filter and suddenly realized, it will be a bit difficult for me to carry it by myself. Then leave one to help you. Dean quickly made a decision and said to Brank, let 4 of them go, and 1 will follow. Brank's face slightly changed. It's impossible. What if you go back on your words after taking away the filter? Either you release me with them and leave with the filter, or they have to follow. You are not qualified to talk about conditions. Dean coldly said. Brank stared at him and suddenly took a deep breath. Really? Don't forget that the filter is in the hands of my people. Your purpose is the thunder filter, right? If something happens to me, my men will smash this lightning filter into pieces. You won't get anything then. Dean's eyes flashed slightly. He didn't expect him to think of this. Being able to become a member of the Wizard Council was really not a simple character. His expression was still indifferent. The destructive thunder filter is not good for anyone. If I'm going to die, then why would I care about it? Brank's expression was very straightforward. He knew that Dean cared about the thunder filter. Even if Dean deliberately tried to hide it, he would be able to see through it. After all, he had been a member of Parliament for many years. This was his bargaining chip and even the hope of a comeback. Everyone takes what they need. You need the thunder filter. I just want to save my life. You want to take me hostage so that you can leave safely. I can assure you that I won't pursue you. But you have to promise me that you won't disturb me and my family in the future. Dean quietly looked at him for a moment. All right, let your people put the lightning filter next to you. Then I'll release you. Brank frowned. What if you don't release me after you remove the filter? It's very simple. The thunder filter is such a big object. It will take 2 people to carry it away. How will I carry the filter if I take you? Dean indifferently said. Brank frowned. He pondered for a moment, but eventually agreed. The 5 guards immediately placed the lightning filter on a stable open space. Dean asked the black mage to look after the filter. Then he brought Brank to the front of the 5 guards. I always keep my word. Let's go. Brank heaved a sigh of relief. The next moment, he suddenly felt a chill on his back, and a tearing pain came from his chest. He lowered his head and saw a sharp blade piercing through his chest, right where his heart was. You. Brank's eyes were full of panic and despair. Dean pulled out the lightning-splitting blade and pushed Brank towards the 5 guards. His body was covered in flames. A special blood-colored bone appeared on his forehead. The sun shined down from the sky. Die. Dean's eyes were cold. His blood-colored bone shot out a few rays of light. The 5 guards were stunned by the sudden turn of events. When Brank's corpse was pushed in front of them, they rushed forward to catch it in a hurry, hoping that Brank was still alive and could be resuscitated. But they found that Brank was completely dead. At the same time, some of them reacted quickly. They were ready to attack Dean, but Dean had already entered the demonic body state. The rays of light from the blood-colored bone on his forehead pierced through the 5 guards' foreheads. Dean felt that his heart was beating a little fiercely, and he even felt a trace of pain. He gasped, and his face was pale. He put away the flames on his body, quickly turned around, and flew to the front of the thunder filter. He said in a hoarse voice, "Let's go." The Black Mage was scared by Dean's attack. He clearly saw that the 5 guards were killed in an instant. All of their heads were pierced through. That was 5 Dominators. The Black Mage was shocked when he heard Dean's hoarse voice. His heart was pounding. Was this the fighting power of the Abyss level? No. Even in the Abyss, it should be a very strong existence, right? He thought in his heart. His hands moved quickly to help Dean move the thunder filter. Holding the filter, the 2 rushed forward and left the place in the blink of an eye. It didn't take long for the 2 to rush out of the main city of Nile territory. The patrolling guards on the city wall desperately chased after them, but they were soon left behind by their speed. The 2 kept running forward and stopped after more than an hour. They came to a wilderness near the giant wall. There were low-level mutant beasts everywhere. Their genes were mutated by radiation. Their hair was rotten, and their bodies were oozing pus. The Black Mage gasped for breath. After putting the thunder filter on the ground, he didn't care about his image. He sat on the ground. One of his arms was cut off. He only had one arm to hold the thunder filter. It was even more strenuous. Huff, Huff, why didn't you agree with him? If we took the thunder filter, they would leave obediently. They wouldn't dare to offend us, so we wouldn't have to suffer. I guess the Lord of Nile has been alarmed. We are definitely wanted criminals in his territory, the Black Mage said while gasping for breath. Dean sat next to him. His chest was slightly heaving up and down. There was some sweat sliding down his cheeks. He wiped it and said in a bad mood, "Of course it would be the best. But how could Bronco be willing to let us take the thunder filter? Once I release him, all he has to do is coordinate with his 5 guards to attack the thunder filter, and we will have no choice but to protect the thunder filter. At that time, the initiative will be in their hands. Once we are in a stalemate, the other guards and the Lord of Nile will arrive, and even more powerful figures will be alerted. Our plan will fall short of success, and we will also be exposed." The Black Mage was stunned. After listening to Dean's words, he realized that it was indeed a very dangerous thing. It was difficult to guarantee that Bronco wouldn't go crazy and attack the thunder filter to pin him down. "You are very thoughtful." The Black Mage took a deep breath and said with a trace of admiration. The more contact he had with Dean, in addition to the initial fear and anger, he now had more admiration and awe for Dean. Dean made him deeply understand what it meant by the younger generation will surpass the older. Strong fighting power wasn't terrible. What was terrible was the mind and the ruthlessness. At this time, Dean's breathing gradually stabilized. He stood up and took off his black robe, including his boots. Then a magical flame appeared between his palms. It looked very magical. Like a magician, he burned the black robe and boots in his hands. Then he looked at the Black Mage and said, "Take off your clothes and eliminate the smell. Get ready to go." The Black Mage saw Dean's magical flame ability. He couldn't help but think of the scene where Dean shot down the 5 rulers in one breath. His eyelids twitched slightly. It was the first time he had seen such a magical ability. He had never heard of it before. Suddenly, his heart shivered. Dean noticed the change in the Black Mage's eyes. He said indifferently, "It seems that you have guessed it. The black mage was stunned. What? My identity? Dean looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. The black mage's whole body was covered in cold sweat, but his face changed from a dazed to a confused one. Why identity? You don't need to act. Your body has made an honest response. Dean smiled. Since you have guessed it, then you should know that I can do anything here. The black mage reluctantly smiled. Elder, you must be joking. Let's go. Dean grabbed the lightning filter and stretched out the split wing on his back. He carried the lightning filter on his back and flew forward. The black mage looked at Dean's back and quickly followed. His heart was filled with other thoughts. The more he thought about it, the more his blood surged. That night, there was a small town on the outer edge of the Phoenix Lord. The town wasn't big. There were only 3 or 4 rich families in it. They had a huge manor. The land in the town was cheap, so several families had built their manors. In terms of land area, they were not inferior to the Bourne family in the Phoenix Lord city. At this moment, in one of the manors, the dim yellow light illuminated the wallpapered hall, making it look somewhat old. A few servants, as well as a few well-dressed women and young men, cowered in the corner of the hall, shivering. The black mage sat on the sofa and let a young maid peel an apple for him. The maid's hand that was holding the knife kept shaking. The apple was almost peeled to the core. Stupid girl, you're courting death. The black mage was very thirsty. He looked at the apple that was peeled to the size of an orange. He couldn't help but roll his eyes. He raised his hand and was ready to slap the maid. If he really got it, with the maid's physique, her entire jaw would probably be dislocated. Chapter 1032. The Dark Wizard's raised hand paused. He turned around and chuckled. I was just joking with her. I won't go so far as to bicker with a lowly servant girl. Hitting her would only dirty my hands. The maid shivered in fear, and her face turned pale. Okay, we have to stay in this town for a few days. Don't go too far. Dean was too lazy to waste his time arguing with the black mage. He concentrated on studying the thunder filter. The black mage smiled and nodded. When he turned his face, the corner of his mouth was slightly curled. He thought, how much better can you be than me? You are a homicidal maniac. He was too lazy to argue with the stupid maid. Although he was dissatisfied with Dean's tone and attitude, he felt that there was some truth in his words. It was indeed ungentlemanly to casually attack the weak. Of course, it was different if he had a purpose. Dean turned on the thunder filter. The flickering electric current sprang out from the metal ring, flashing and jumping. It connected with each other to form a network, making the huge metal ring look like the border of the thunder mirror. He bit off a piece of his nail and threw it into the electric current. The hard nail was hit by the electric current. It floated in the electric net, rolled a few times, and turned into ashes, disappearing. Dean immediately looked at the observation mirror. He saw some light yellow particles appear in the mirror. He adjusted the magnification from 200 times to 500 times. The light yellow particles gradually expanded. These tiny particles contained countless small dots. There were cracks on the surface of these dots, like the lines of a human palm. He continued to magnify the magnification from 500 times to 1,000 times, and then 1,500 times. The small particles continued to expand and contain new tiny particles. It was very magical. Dean couldn't remember how many times he had adjusted the magnification. When the magnification button next to him reached the bottom, he saw a magical scene in the observation mirror. It was like looking at the Earth from the starry sky. It was a luminous light yellow ball, like a planet suspended in the starry sky, but it did not rotate. Outside it, there were 4 groups of light of different colors rotating, like the moon orbiting the Earth. These 4 groups of small balls were red, blue, gold, and white. The orbit was constant, and the magnetic field between them was very stable. When the magnification was slightly reduced, one could see that these 4 balls of light were surrounding the sphere, and their surface was enveloped by an almost transparent membrane that enveloped them. If one had to use a word to describe it, it would be the universe and the starry sky. Dean was stunned by the spectacle. He almost suspected that there was something wrong with the instrument if he didn't see the beautiful scenery step by step. It was hard for him to believe that this was the smallest landscape in his fingernail. Of course, it was possible that what the thunder filter saw might not be the smallest. After a long time, Dean slowly retracted the magnification and saw the original light yellow particles. He chose to reset the filter, and the scene in the observation mirror was quickly cleared, leaving only darkness. Dean thought for a moment. He used his fingernails to dig out a bit of fruit from the table and threw it into the lightning net. The fruit was quickly crushed. Dean looked through the mirror and saw a bubble-like ball. It was the nutrient content of the fruit. He kept zooming in and finally saw a connected ball of different colors. It seems that I have to try to know what I'm seeing, Dean murmured to himself. He called the black mage who was resting next to him and asked him to help move the thunder filter to the main room. Then he cleaned out the bookcases and desks in the main room and stuffed them into the bedroom next to the main room. He wanted to make room in the hall so that people wouldn't notice the abnormality here. I'll leave these people to you. Don't leak the news, Dean told the black mage. The black mage smiled and said, "Leave it to me." Dean closed the door and studied the thunder filter in the main room. After a few days, Dean had completely mastered the thunder filter after trying a variety of different samples. During this period, he had decomposed the samples including paper, tables, plastic shells of lamps, blankets, animal skins, and so on. He even found the blood of the black mage, the other maids in the manor, the owner of the manor and his children's blood, flesh, and so on. Through the observation of the thunder filter, Dean found an amazing phenomenon. His own blood composition was completely different from other people's blood composition. When his blood was expanded to the extreme, the scene he saw was almost the same as the scene he saw on the first day when he decomposed the nails. A big ball was surrounded by 4 small balls, like satellites orbiting in an unchanging orbit. The 4 small balls were also red, blue, gold, and white in color, but the ball around them had changed from light yellow to blood red. It was probably because the sample was taken for blood. Dean tested the blood of different parts of the body. He also tried his hair and found that there were 4 small spheres surrounding it. But the spheres that were surrounded by the 4 spheres had turned black. When it was shrunk, the big sphere and the 4 smaller spheres were all wrapped by a translucent membrane. They looked like a whole sphere, and blurry traces of 4 colors could be seen from the outside of the membrane. However, when it was shrunk even further, this membrane ball was surrounded by countless membrane balls, and on the outside of all the membrane balls, there was actually another membrane that enveloped all the membrane balls inside. And as it continued to shrink, the large membrane ball that enveloped the countless membrane balls was also enveloped by an even larger membrane. His blood and flesh samples were all the same, and he even intended to dissect his bones to observe. Logically speaking, different parts of his body should have different compositions. However, his body could no longer be measured by the body of a normal human. After all, his body had been implanted with magic marks and had been deeply transformed by them. In addition, he had also been experimented on by Crimson Moon. In a sense, he was no longer human. Comparing his own situation, Dean found that the final landscape of the Black Mage's blood was similar to the final landscape of the blood of the maids in the manor. The Black Mage's blood was 2 balls of the same size around each other, like a yin and yang fish. But the 2 balls were surrounded by a shining ring of stars. The maids were also 2 balls of the same size, but there was no ring around them. I don't know how to define this for humans. Is it a cell or a gene? Or something deeper, or something else? Dean had a toothache. This was his biggest headache. There was no basis for measurement. Although he could observe the smallest composition of the material, he did not know what it represented or how to define it. Time flew by. Dean stayed in the manor for a month. During this month, many people from the town came to the manor to find the family, but they were all sent away by the manor owner. Among them, there were also his men who came to report the income and expenditure of the financial report, but they were also pushed back. With the Black Mage beside him, the family did not dare to move in the slightest. They did not even have the opportunity to sneak a glance at Dean. Dean was bored in the main room. He had changed from the initial use of a lightning filter to observe the material to the combination of different materials. Then he used the lightning filter to observe the changes of these materials, so as to infer the general characteristics. As the observation deepened, he found something incredible. He felt that the final landscape seen by the lightning filter was not the real final landscape of his body. There should be a more wonderful landscape inside the big ball. However, it was impossible to see it with the lightning filter. In addition, by comparing the genes of the masters like the Black Mage and the ordinary humans like the maids and the manor, he found that his body had many characteristics that their bodies did not have. First of all, the healing ability was fast. In the case of the most basic structure of the magnetic field, even if his body was cut open, it would quickly heal. The strong magnetic field would quickly gather the separated materials and restore them. Under the same experiment, the Black Mage's healing ability was significantly weaker. He only needed more than a minute to recover, but the Black Mage needed nearly half an hour, and the maids needed a day or even 2 days. In addition, Dean also found that when other materials were mixed into his blood, the final landscape was that the big ball around the big ball was still maintaining a constant trajectory. When other materials invaded and encountered the big ball, they were immediately destroyed and smashed like hitting a train. The broken fragments were integrated into the big ball. But strangely, the big ball did not grow in size after absorbing other materials, and there was no change. When he kept mixing other materials, after a certain amount, he found that there seemed to be a faint shadow of a star ring on the big ball around the big ball, especially when he mixed in the blood of the parasitic soul worm. The final landscape of the parasitic soul worm's blood was not 2 balls like the human blood, but a sharp blue awl like an icicle. When the icicle approached the big ball, it was immediately smashed by the 4-color ball along the trajectory. After the broken icicle fragments were absorbed into the big ball, the shadow of the star ring around the 4-color ball on the surface became more clear. After repeated attempts, Dean finally made 2 amazing discoveries. The first was that the big ball in the final landscape formed by his body was attractive. He discovered that every time he smashed something, it would be sucked over instead of falling naturally. It didn't disperse either. This sphere had a devouring nature, like a tiny black hole in the human body. And in every drop of blood in his body, there were countless of such tiny black holes. In addition to the devouring nature, he also found that the blood of the parasitic soul worm could promote the birth of the mysterious star ring. However, when he experimented with the Black Mage's blood, he found something different. When the 2 balls and the star ring outside the Black Mage's body hit the icicle of the parasitic soul worm, they were both injured. The icicle was broken, and the star ring and the 2 balls were also broken. They separated from each other and did not attract each other. There seemed to be some kind of repulsion between them. It seems that my body is still very different from ordinary people. I don't know if the abyss is like this, or if it's because I have the origami gene in my body. Dean was thoughtful. Through these days of experiments, he opened his eyes, and repeated experiments also made him have an incredible conjecture, which was his own potential. After repeated experiments, he found that the star ring outside the final landscape seemed to be the power of the magic mark. After repeated arguments, he was basically convinced of this point. The Black Mage only had 1 star ring, which meant that he only had 1 kind of magic mark. His final landscape was a big ball and 4 small balls of different colors. After absorbing the blood of the parasitic soul worm, a star ring appeared outside the 4 small balls. For every kind of parasitic soul worm that was absorbed, a star ring appeared outside the small ball. For this reason, he had to let the Black Mage go back and forth from the town, sneak into the black shop in the city, and buy a lot of different low-level parasitic soul worms. Fortunately, he only used it for experiments, so his requirements were not high. He did not need rare or legendary level parasitic soul worms. Even ordinary parasitic soul worms would be fine. It was not difficult for the Black Mage to buy them, and he could even buy them in batches. After absorbing 4 different parasitic soul worms, The 4 balls were surrounded by star rings. When Dean continued to try the 5th kind, he was shocked to find that one of the 4 balls had a star ring. The 2 star rings circled around it, looking even more gorgeous. Dudian found that there was no limit to the number of star rings that could be added to the 4-color ball. After adding more than 30 different kinds of parasitic soul worms, the number of star rings was still increasing. There were as many as 8 or 9 star rings on each of the 4 balls, almost covering the original light of the 4 balls. This was only a part of the blood experiment, but the experiment was successful. Dean could not help but think that his body could also be like this. Unlimited absorption, unlimited evolution. This idea was a bit bold, even appalling, but the experiment in front of him made Dean think so. The result was too shocking, and at the same time, it brought great excitement. If it was really possible, he could not imagine what kind of terrible power a person who could absorb 2, 3, 4, or even more magic marks would have. If it is successful, maybe I will really be a god. Dean thought of Crimson Moon's pursuit. Could it be that her experiment was successful on him? If that was the case, wouldn't his body already be considered the body of a god? In any case, Dean felt that it was necessary to give it a try. Anyway, his current situation could not be worse. Moreover, the repeated experiments with the thunder filter for more than a month had increased his confidence a lot. A week later, Dean left the town with the Black Mage and moved the thunder filter away. After finding a cheap house in a remote place, Dean contacted Barton and the others and asked them to watch over the thunder filter. Barton and the others had gradually mixed into various circles on the giant wall of Polga. Many of them had a legitimate identity, but there was still a small number of people who had not been registered yet, and they could help him watch over the thunder filter. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.